Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ellen Greenberg. Ellen Ray Greenberg was born in New York in June 1993 to Santa and George Greenberg. As their only child, she grew up in a loving and nurturing environment. During her high school years, Ellen was a dedicated team player and demonstrated great athletic potential. She was characterized as energetic, restless, and outgoing, yet she also excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen attended Pennsylvania State University, where she earned a degree in public relations. However, she soon realized this wasn't the career path she wanted to pursue. In parallel with her job, she enrolled in a pedagogical institute's correspondence department, and a few years later, successfully defended her diploma. Ellen then relocated to Philadelphia, where she landed a job as a junior high school teacher. Ellen's life was thriving, according to her relatives. She was bursting with enthusiasm, making ambitious plans for the future, and absolutely loved her work with students. It was during this period that she met Samuel, also known as Sam Greenberg, a young man from a wealthy and prominent family in the city. Sam's parents ran a large business, and his uncle was renowned as one of the top lawyers in the state. The two met in 2009 at a party through mutual friends and instantly clicked. Their friendly banter soon turned into a whirlwind romance, and they decided to move in together shortly after. As the clock struck 2011, on New Year's Eve, Sam proposed to Ellen, and the couple began making preparations for their spring wedding that same year. The news was met with joy from both families, and it seemed that nothing could come between the happy couple. Ellen threw herself into the delightful tasks associated with wedding planning, including drawing up guest lists, sending out invitations, choosing a venue and decorations, trying on wedding dresses, and organizing their honeymoon. Notably, Ellen took the reins on these preparations, with the groom seemingly uninvolved, although their loved ones didn't think much of it at the time. On January 26, 2011, a severe snowstorm hit the city. Ellen went to school as usual, but classes were canceled around noon due to strong winds and a blizzard, and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she shared with her fiancé, Sam. Later that day, the couple allegedly had a disagreement, which Sam initially confirmed but later denied. At around 5 p.m., Sam went to the gym in their apartment complex. When he returned, he found the apartment door locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly, then called out to Ellen by name, drawing the attention of their neighbors. He also tried calling her phone and sending messages, but there was no response to his knocking, calling, and yelling. However, it was clear that Ellen's phone was still inside the apartment. Sam went to the first floor of the building to ask the security guard for help. He explained the situation and asked if it was possible to open the front door, but the guard said he didn't have the authority to do so and couldn't leave his post. Sam returned to his floor, determined to take action. He used his shoulder to force open the door, managing to break the latch on the first try. As he entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific sight. Ellen was sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinet door, her body brutally slashed with a knife and her clothes covered in blood. Sam immediately called emergency services, describing the scene. When asked to check Ellen's pulse, Sam hesitated, repeatedly asking if it was really necessary. Then there was a pause before he suddenly announced that there was a knife stuck in Ellen's chest, which he claimed he hadn't noticed until that moment. He concluded that Ellen was clearly already dead. The police officers who responded to the call were taken aback, having never encountered a scene like this in their extensive careers. They found the door locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had later dislodged with his shoulder. There was no evidence of forced entry or intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment, and all valuables and cash remained untouched. The officers noted that nothing appeared to have been searched or disturbed. However, the most striking aspect emerged when the deceased girl's body was examined, There were no signs of struggle or attempts at self-defense, suggesting that the event occurred suddenly and the victim had no time to react. The body bore approximately 24 stab wounds of varying depths, with the fatal blow delivered to the heart, claiming Ellen's life. The investigation's gross negligence in examining the crime scene and the victim's body will be revisited later. This oversight allowed crucial evidence to go undetected, permitting a potential perpetrator to remain at large. What was even more bizarre was the police's behavior, who, even before the medical examination, seemed to think that Ellen's injuries were self-inflicted. The fact that Ellen had been experiencing panic attacks and was seeing a psychologist and was on prescription medication led them to believe that she had attempted to take her own life. Ever since she had started suffering from an anxiety disorder, Ellen had been prone to panic attacks. The situation was so severe that she had sought professional help from a psychologist. She tried not to burden her family with her concerns, and they, in turn, had attributed the changes in her behavior to pre-wedding stress and excitement. The psychologist who worked with Ellen had prescribed her 2 medications to help manage her anxiety, which she took regularly. As the psychologist would later report, neither of these medications, whether taken separately or together, could have had any adverse effect on Ellen's mental state, leading her to contemplate death. The specialist also noted that, despite her anxiety, Ellen had never had such dark thoughts. Ellen's friends and colleagues observed a change in her behavior after she moved in with Sam. She became anxious, restless, and hesitant to make decisions without consulting him. Whenever faced with a situation, Ellen would say she needed to discuss it with Sam and couldn't give an answer without his input. Ellen's parents also noticed these changes, but whenever their daughter tried to open up about her emotional struggles, she would insist that Sam was not the cause. Interestingly, 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and move back to her parents' house. Her mother was taken aback but reassured Ellen that she was always welcome to return home, no questions asked. However, Ellen never mentioned it again. Later, it was suggested that after the couple moved in together, Sam became violent towards his fiancée, and she lived in fear, too afraid to confide in anyone about the abuse. Although the psychologist Ellen saw did not confirm or deny this, they observed that Ellen struggled to put her feelings into words and describe what was troubling her. It seemed as though she wanted to reveal something significant, but her fear held her back. The case was plagued by inconsistencies and unanswered questions from the start. What's striking is that nobody made a serious effort to investigate these anomalies. The investigation was remarkably sloppy, with the crime scene and body examination poorly handled and expert analysis lacking. Many crucial details, facts, and evidence were disregarded and lost forever, making it impossible to reconstruct the events of the incident accurately. There were no signs of self-defense injuries on the victim's hands, suggesting that she did not try to fight back. Her body, however, showed multiple bruises. According to her fiancé, these were likely caused by her participation in team sports. Ellen's parents disputed this, stating that their daughter had not had time for sports or gym activities recently due to her busy work schedule and active wedding preparations. No suicide note was found, and Ellen's body showed signs of a brutal attack. Yet, investigators quickly suggested that she might have taken her own life. The presence of food spices and a cutting board on the kitchen table led them to theorize that Ellen had started preparing dinner, only to suddenly decide to end her life by cutting herself with a knife. However, the autopsy revealed that Ellen's body had nearly 24 stab wounds of varying depths, with 10 of them inflicted from behind. Given the severity of some of these wounds, medical experts questioned how she could have continued to move and inflict such injuries on herself, eventually stabbing herself in the heart. This raised serious doubts about the initial suicide ruling. Despite these contradictions, the investigation stuck to its original version, refusing to open a criminal case. The main reason cited was the lack of evidence of an intruder in the apartment and the absence of any signs of self-defense. Some concerns were raised about the possibility of forced entry into the apartment due to the unusual latch on the inner part of the door. This latch could be closed from the outside, but not fully. If the latch had been fully closed from the inside, it would have been impossible to break it open with a single shoulder blow without damaging the doorway. However, based on the nature of the damage, it appeared that the latch was only partially closed, which would have been possible from outside the door. Sam testified that he sought help from a security guard who accompanied him upstairs and witnessed him kicking down a door. However, the guard disputed this, stating that he never left his post. Despite this discrepancy, the investigation did not pursue the matter, deeming it irrelevant. The investigation reviewed footage from a single surveillance camera leading to the gym, which showed Sam walking towards the gym and then returning. Although it is possible that Sam exited through another passage and returned to the gym during the intervening time, his alibi was not investigated, and potential witnesses who could confirm or deny his presence at the gym were not interviewed. Sam didn't call the police until an hour after he discovered the door was locked, and his fiancée didn't respond to his knocking and shouting. When he finally made the call, the officer who took it noticed that Sam was acting strangely, despite his frantic screams and wails. The specialist was suspicious of Sam's behavior, thinking it was an act, because although he was calm enough to answer questions, his voice wasn't shaking when asked to start administering first aid. At first, Sam questioned the need to do so, then calmed down, and finally mentioned a knife stuck in his girlfriend's chest, which he claimed not to have noticed earlier. It's worth noting that before calling the police, Sam called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police and went with Sam to the station to make a statement. The next day, Sam and his uncle went back to the sealed-off apartment to collect some personal belongings, taking all of Ellen's electronic devices, 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet. A few days after the investigation began, detectives unexpectedly decided to examine the devices in question, only to discover that the search history contained queries related to suicide. When police officers arrived at the scene, they conducted a brief investigation and hastily concluded that Ellen had committed suicide. Even when new evidence came to light, they refused to reconsider their initial ruling. The sequence of events surrounding Ellen's wounds couldn't be determined, but it was clear that the fatal blow was to the heart. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy found this unusual and decided to conduct a further investigation. He sent a sample of Ellen's spine to a specialist to determine if her spinal cord was damaged. If it was, Ellen would have been paralyzed and unable to inflict the fatal wound herself. However, the specialist suddenly changed his mind, abandoned the investigation, and claimed that the spinal cord was intact. Despite this, the report was never attached to the case files. The authorities also overlooked the fact that, despite the extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood at the scene, suggesting that someone may have cleaned it up. No one bothered to search for potential signs of blood being washed away. The luminol that could have been used to detect blood traces was ignored. Additionally, the trash cans in the apartment were not examined, which meant that any potential evidence they may have held was lost forever. The Greenberg family broke the devastating news to Ellen's parents about their daughter's death, as they were the first to arrive at the scene. Although Ellen's family lived several hundred miles away, they rushed to the location as soon as possible. Santa and George were in shock, refusing to accept that their daughter would take her own life. However, they were left with unanswered questions about the events of that night and received only a vague conclusion with no criminal investigation. Frustrated, the Greenbergs' family decided to launch their own inquiry with the help of independent experts. A private detective, intrigued by the case, offered his services for free. After reviewing the evidence, The detective concluded that Ellen's body had been moved after her death, evident from a dried blood trickle from her nose to her ear and smeared stains on the floor resembling drag marks. Furthermore, a guard recalled that Sam, who had sought help, was wearing boots, not a tracksuit as he had claimed. Despite the presentation of new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were once again refused a criminal case or further investigation. In addition, they were refused access to case files, which included a recording of Sam's phone call to the police and surveillance footage. Years later, a young officer joined the county's homicide unit as an assistant prosecutor. Having heard about the unsolved and unusual case while studying at the university, he decided to conduct a further investigation. During his inquiry, he discovered that the injury to the back of Ellen's head suggested she may have been attacked from behind, and that there was no evidence of a spinal cord injury, contradicting the official conclusion. After re-examining the preserved spine fragment, an independent specialist concluded that the spinal cord had suffered damage in multiple areas, making it impossible for Ellen to have caused further harm to herself. Despite this, the police declined to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner officially ruled that all 20 wounds were self-inflicted, but Ellen's grieving parents filed a new lawsuit in 2019, alleging that the coroner and experts had not done their jobs properly. Although the lawsuit was heard and settled, the trials did not begin due to the pandemic. Ellen's family, friends, and colleagues are convinced that she could not have taken her own life, citing her aversion to the sight of blood and low pain threshold. The parents created a social media page to share official documents, new information, and alternative theories. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed once again, but the Greenbergs managed to transfer it to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over and reopened the investigation, 11 years after the tragic events. However, to this day, the investigation remains unfinished. After the tragedy, Samuel made an effort to stay in contact with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law for the first year. However, he did not participate in the investigations they initiated. He refused to cooperate with the police and showed no interest in the case. He openly accepted the official account that his fiancée had inflicted the fatal injuries on herself. Samuel soon found comfort with another woman and married her just a year later. He and his new wife moved to a different state and ended all ties with the Greenberg family. Today, Samuel and his wife are raising 2 children together, and he tries to forget about his deceased. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brittany Gregory. Brittany Gregory was born on April 1, 1988, in Brick Township, the youngest of 5 children in her family. When her parents divorced, she went to live with her father, but remained close to her siblings, particularly her sister Brianna, who was 4 years older. In school, Brittany was an outstanding student, and her teachers believed she had the potential to become a scholar. However, her unusual dream was to become a forensic scientist and study crime scene evidence. As the baby of the family, Brittany relished the extra attention she received. Her mother acknowledged that she was spoiled, but not vain or arrogant. For her 16th birthday in April, she held her mother to a promise to let her get her belly button pierced. Brittany was a big fan of pop star Britney Spears and had posters of her in her bedroom. She enjoyed watching cartoons, especially SpongeBob SquarePants. Her fascination with forensic science led her to watch TV shows about the subject, a profession she wanted to pursue. Brittany and her mother would often watch the same shows together and then call each other to discuss them. In 2004, Brittany, 16, and her sister, Brianna, 20, lived with their father, Joe Dunn, and his new girlfriend, Lori Peterson, in a small house close to their school. Located at the end of the street, the house was near a wooded area. At that time, Brittany had been dating John Fitzgerald, 18, for almost 2 years. He was a nice guy who had the approval of Brittany's family, and they had a very warm relationship. making them seem like the perfect couple. On Sunday, July 11th, 2004, Brittany's mother, Deborah, and her sister Brianna drove to South Toms River, about 15 miles from Brittany's home, to visit her older brother and his wife, who had recently had a baby girl. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., Brittany called her mother on her cell phone, asking for a ride to her boyfriend John's house. Brittany sounded very upset, suggesting there might be trouble. Her mother explained that she was out of town and couldn't drive her, but said that her sister Brianna could arrive in about an hour. Brittany agreed to wait. About 45 minutes after Brittany phoned, Brianna was finally free to call her back, but Brittany didn't pick up. Brianna assumed that Brittany must be sleeping or that someone had taken her to John's, which is why she wasn't answering. However, when Brianna got back home the next morning, she was surprised to find that Brittany was nowhere to be found, although all of her belongings, including her phone, were still at the house. Brianna suspected that Brittany might have spent the night at her boyfriend's house, but it was unusual that she hadn't mentioned it to anyone and had left her cell phone behind. This wasn't typical of Brittany. Seeking answers, Brianna began calling all of Brittany's friends to see if anyone had information about her whereabouts, but none of them knew anything. After failing to reach her sister, Brianna decided to call John, who told her he last spoke to Brittany on Sunday morning, and they hadn't been in touch since. Lori Peterson, a family friend who lived with the girls, reported that she returned home around 10 p.m. on Sunday night, but Brittany was nowhere to be found. Brianna immediately sensed something was wrong and went to the police station to file a missing persons report. At first, the police were skeptical, thinking Brittany had likely run away or was out with friends. However, Brianna convinced them that she had already contacted all of Brittany's friends and her boyfriend, and none of them knew her whereabouts. Brianna was certain her sister wouldn't run away from home because she was an exemplary student who spent most of her time in the library. Brittany always notified her family before leaving the house, and all her belongings, including her money and phone, were left behind. After Brianna persuaded the police that her sister couldn't have disappeared on her own, they launched an investigation. The officers first searched Brittany's room at home, inspecting her belongings, including her purse with her phone, ID, and makeup. Although they didn't find any suspicious evidence, they still interviewed everyone living in the house and ruled out the possibility that someone close to Brittany was involved in her disappearance. The police launched a thorough search of the area surrounding the house, checking every nearby residence, scouring the property, and interviewing neighbors. Their goal was to find potential witnesses who might have seen or heard anything unusual. As they surveyed the scene, they noted the house's location at the end of the street, as well as the wooded area directly across the street. During their canvassing, none of the neighbors reported anything suspicious, except for one woman who recalled seeing Brittany walking down the street toward her own house late on Friday night, when it was already dark. Although this sighting occurred 2 days before Brittany's disappearance, investigators took note of it, recognizing it as a curious detail that didn't quite fit the image of the modest, bookish girl who rarely ventured out without her parents' permission. This raised questions. What had prompted Brittany to venture out so late, and was she actually allowed to do so? The police were eager to determine whether Brittany was as innocent and homebound as her sister had described her. Numerous police interviews with Brittany's family, neighbors, and teachers revealed that everyone spoke highly of her, with no one having anything bad to say. In her conversation with the police, Brianna mentioned that Brittany and her boyfriend, John, had a strained relationship lately with frequent arguing. On the day of her disappearance, the couple had another fight, leaving Brittany upset and wanting to visit John that evening to make amends. As a result of their investigation, the detectives decided to scrutinize John's alibi more thoroughly. They asked him to come to the police station to determine if he had seen Brittany on the day she vanished. John stated that his last phone conversation with Brittany was on Sunday morning when he was at the beach with friends. At that time, Brittany was upset that he had gone without her, and they had an argument. They hadn't spoken since then. John also revealed that he had ended their relationship a few days prior, but she couldn't accept it, even though she knew he was already dating another girl. John claimed he had no plans to meet Brittany that night and wasn't aware she was coming to his house. The reason for their breakup was a rumor that Brittany had kissed another guy at a party. Although John didn't see it himself, he decided to end the relationship and started dating another girl. John last saw Brittany on July 10th, the day before she disappeared, when she gave him a letter expressing her desire to reconcile. The detectives asked John for permission to review the letter Brittany had written, and he handed it over. In the letter, Brittany apologized for her behavior and for breaking John's heart. She also asked him to remain friends. John seemed genuinely concerned and worried that Brittany hadn't been found yet. The police had no evidence linking John to Brittany's disappearance, and after he passed a lie detector test, he was cleared of suspicion. However, John did tell detectives one important detail. He said that Brittany often came to his house through the woods behind her father's house. The story of Brittany's disappearance grew increasingly complex. Detectives started to speculate whether Brittany had attempted to reach John's house, about a mile from her father's house, by walking through the woods that night. Given the darkness, she could have easily gotten lost or encountered difficulties along the way. The police launched a search in the woods, focusing on the path that began near her house and which she likely took. Walking in the woods at night was frightening and perilous, raising the question of why a young girl like Brittany wasn't intimidated by the prospect. The forest search continued for 3 days, but yielded no results. Just when the investigation seemed stuck, a woman came forward who had been with her brother in a nearby park on the night Brittany vanished. The park was quiet and deserted, with no cars present, except for a distinctive Chevrolet pickup truck that drove by. The woman noticed the truck, even recalling its license plate. Following a thorough investigation, authorities discovered the truck was registered to 23-year-old Anthony Geiger. To establish a connection between Anthony and Brittany's disappearance, police delved into his past, revealing that he was the former boyfriend of Brittany's sister, Bobby Joe. Bobby Joe explained to detectives that she and Anthony split about a month prior due to his excessive jealousy and obsessive focus on her sister Brittany. She suspected Anthony, 23, harbored feelings for Brittany, which led her to ultimately terminate their relationship. Brittany's friends recalled that Anthony always had a strange way of looking at her and would frequently try to flirt with her. The most recent instance of this behavior was at lunch, where Anthony once again attempted to flirt with Brittany. As a result, detectives began to suspect Anthony of kidnapping Brittany and decided to bring him in for questioning. During the interrogation, Anthony claimed that he was not in the area where Brittany lived on the evening of July 11th. He stated that he didn't arrive until the next day, July 12th, by which time the police had already started searching for the missing girl. Anthony admitted to being on good terms with Brittany and seeing her at social gatherings, but maintained that they were just friends and that he never flirted with her. He also stated that he was aware that Brittany was too young for him and that his feelings towards her were purely platonic. Anthony testified that he spent the evening of July 11th at home with his new girlfriend, who corroborated his alibi. Despite this, investigators remained suspicious of Anthony, partly because his residence was near Brittany's home. Investigators went back to examine the letter Brittany had written to John and noticed disturbing signs that she was saying goodbye to her loved one. They began to fear that Brittany might be hurting herself after breaking off her relationship with her boyfriend. However, Brittany's parents rejected this version, believing that their daughter was smart and determined and would not give up her grand plans because of her breakup with her boyfriend. They believed Brittany was too in love with life. After the investigation stalled once more, the police turned to the media to seek help from the public in finding potential witnesses. To bolster their efforts, officers from other areas joined the investigation. Frustrated with waiting, Brittany's parents took an active role in the search, going door to door in the neighborhood, asking questions, although this approach yielded no results. The police refocused their attention on Brittany's home, where everything began. Even if she had indeed walked through the woods to meet her boyfriend, it was puzzling that she had left her phone behind in her room. Could someone have abducted her from the house itself? If so, was it someone she knew and trusted? During a meticulous search of the house, the police discovered a crucial piece of evidence in Brittany's room: her personal diary, containing a handwritten letter. The contents of this letter proved vital to the investigation, lifting the shroud of secrecy surrounding the family's relationships. Brittany wrote about her life in a letter, describing her relationships with friends and her boyfriend, as well as her schooling. She also shared details about her family, explaining that it was dysfunctional. Every Sunday, she visited her older brother, who was in jail. Her mother was a drug addict who had abandoned her when she was just 9 years old. Now Brittany lived with her father, with whom she was not close, and his girlfriends. Brittany admitted that she wasn't perfect and had done things she wasn't proud of. However, she was determined not to follow in her parents' footsteps and wanted to succeed in life. Her dream was to become a forensic scientist and help solve crimes. After reading the letter, the police widened their search to include Brittany's family, who had not previously been suspected. Detectives began investigating each family member and discovered that a male massage parlor was operating from Brittany's home. Lori Peterson, a friend of Brittany's father, was offering intimate services to different men every day, masquerading as a massage therapist. Neighbors were aware of this, and Lori herself didn't hide it, distributing business cards in the area. Neighbors reported that Brittany's father's house was a frequent gathering spot for suspicious individuals who would use illegal substances. This led the police to believe that the home environment was dysfunctional. Multiple men, mostly unknown to Lori, would visit her for her services, raising the possibility that one of them might have kidnapped Brittany from the house. Over 100 police officers worked to identify everyone who had visited Joe Dunn's house in the past month, a challenging task. A week after Brittany's disappearance on July 18th, the police announced they had arrested a murder suspect, stunning Brittany's family, who were still searching for her since her body had not been found. When Brittany's mother, Deborah, saw a picture of the suspect on television, she recognized him as her longtime friend, 38-year-old Jack Jr. He had been a close family friend for 20 years, attending all their family gatherings. In fact, his daughter was engaged to Brittany's brother, who was currently in prison. Deborah was stunned, unable to comprehend how Jack could be involved in Brittany's case, given his close relationship with their family and his children's friendship with Brittany. Despite this, they still held out hope that Brittany was alive. However, court records and interviews revealed that Jack was a hardened criminal with a history of threatening his neighbors throughout his adult life. He had been arrested over a dozen times in the last 10 years alone and had served time in state prison for theft and parole violations. His numerous crimes included breaking into cars, houses, and garden sheds, as well as drug use and sales. He had even threatened a man with a baseball bat and fought with police. Many of his offenses went unreported, as people were afraid of him. The last time Jack was sentenced, he received 5.5 years in prison and was released just a year before Brittany's disappearance. Although Brittany's parents suspected that Jack might steal from them to fund his drug habit, they never thought he was capable of harming their daughter. After Jack's arrest, the details of how the police connected him to Brittany's disappearance came to light. It started with a call to the police station. The caller reported that a few days prior he had met Jack, who had confided in him about back pain he was experiencing due to burying a girl's body in sandy soil. Jack boasted that the burial site would never be discovered and asked for advice on how deep to bury the body to avoid attracting animals. The police asked the informant to come to the station and suggested he wear a wire to meet with Jack. Jack questioned him about the crimes, including the murder. The informant agreed, and during the meeting, Jack revealed that he had buried the girl's body in a secluded area, claiming it would never be found. Although he admitted to committing the murder, he refrained from mentioning Brittany's name. In addition, Jack revealed his intention to eliminate someone who possessed too much knowledge, gesturing towards his friend Tommy, who was present in the car but didn't overhear the conversation. This led the detectives to believe that Tommy held crucial information that could crack the case, since Jack wouldn't have wanted to silence him otherwise. The detectives brought Tommy in for questioning at the station, but he refused to cooperate, claiming he knew nothing. However, the detectives were certain he was lying, and to prove their point, they played a recording of Jack stating he wanted to kill Tommy due to his knowledge. Realizing he was in danger, Tommy decided to collaborate with the authorities. According to Tommy, on the night Brittany vanished, he and Jack were driving around the neighborhood, smoking crack. They stopped in front of Brittany's house, and Jack decided to enter the house to discuss some matters with her father. When he entered, the house was empty except for Brittany. 5 minutes later, Jack returned to the car with Brittany, who sat in the back seat. Tommy was perplexed and asked what was happening, but Brittany remained silent, gazing downward. Jack informed him that he would take Tommy home. Tommy alleged that Jack drove him home, and when he exited the car, Brittany, who was sitting in the back, also got out and moved to the front passenger seat. Subsequently, Tommy and Jack drove away. The next day, when they met again, Jack didn't mention the previous day's events. They stopped at a car wash, where Jack gave his car an unusually thorough cleaning, washing both the interior and exterior. The car wash attendant joked about this, but Jack became angry, warning him to mind his own business or face the consequences. Tommy later explained that when he heard about Brittany's disappearance, he suspected Jack might be involved. He asked Jack directly what he had done with the girl. Jack became furious at the question, claiming he had simply driven her home and left. He rudely told Tommy not to ask again if he didn't want trouble. Tommy assumed that Jack had taken Brittany to the woods to rape her, believing that Jack had originally planned to use Lori's intimate services that night, but was thwarted when she wasn't at home. The detectives knew they had found their man when they arrived to arrest Jack. He was holding a can of gasoline, looking like he was about to set his car on fire, likely to destroy evidence. A search of the car revealed bloodstains, which forensic tests confirmed belonged to Brittany. Further investigation showed that Jack had visited a car wash after being with Brittany, and the police seized the vacuum cleaner he used. Criminologists found sand particles stuck together with Brittany's blood inside the vacuum, leaving no doubt about its origin. Although the police had gathered strong evidence, Jack refused to admit to kidnapping and murdering Brittany and remained silent about the case. The detectives interviewed Jack's acquaintances, and most of them believed he was capable of murder, describing him as a man who would stop at nothing. Despite being unemployed, Jack always seemed to have money. During the investigation, a patrol officer reported seeing a car parked on the side of the road near the woods on the night of Brittany's disappearance. The car belonged to Jack. At the time, the officer was unaware that Brittany was missing. When questioned, Jack claimed he was searching for his dog, which had run off into the woods. This information led the search for Brittany's body to focus on the area where the officer spotted Jack's car. Despite an extensive search involving police officers, K-9 units, helicopters, and volunteers, no body was found. Investigators theorized that Brittany, desperate for a ride to her boyfriend's house that night, asked Jack for a lift when he arrived at her home. Jack agreed to drive her, but instead, he took his friend Tommy home and then raped and killed Brittany, taking advantage of the situation. To prove this, however, the police needed to find her body. As the police attempted to question Jack and obtain a confession, a new witness emerged. A woman with a troubled past, who had previously been held hostage by Jack for months, called the police. She claimed that if Jack was indeed responsible for Brittany's murder, she might know where he had hidden her body. During her captivity, she had gained intimate knowledge of Jack's habits, frequent haunts, and secrets, which she was willing to share with the police. One day, a woman recounted how the suspect had shown her a location near a power line and told her it was an ideal spot to bury a body, as it was unlikely anyone would ever find it. Initially, the detectives were skeptical, but they began questioning her. She described the site as being in Lakewood, with sandy soil. This detail sparked a memory for the police, as an informant had previously mentioned that the suspect had complained about the difficulty of burying a body in sandy soil. The authorities decided to search the area the woman had described, which was just 3 miles from Brittany's home. Despite conducting an extensive search over several days, they found nothing. However, they persisted, motivated by the similarity between the sand found in the vacuum cleaner used by the suspect at the car wash and the soil in the area. Over 100 people searched the dense forest on the border of Monmouth and Ocean counties daily. Finally, on Tuesday, July 27, 2004, 15 days after Brittany was reported missing, her grave was discovered. 3 New Jersey K-9 officers, who had joined the search on the weekend, found her body. The naked body of the young girl was found in a hole, with a necklace bearing her name hanging around her neck. The detectives immediately confirmed it was Brittany's body. The medical examiner performed an autopsy, but was unable to determine the exact cause of death due to the decomposition of the body over 2 weeks. The examiner could not rule out strangulation or suffocation, as Brittany had suffered both head trauma and strangulation. Brittany's body showed no clear signs of sexual assault, although the medical examiner did not exclude the possibility of rape having taken place. Jack ultimately decided to accept a plea bargain after consulting with his lawyer. Brittany's family also agreed to the deal to avoid a lengthy and draining trial. According to Jack, Brittany asked him to drop her off at her boyfriend's house, and he agreed. First, he drove Tommy home, and then he planned to take Brittany to her boyfriend's house. But before doing so, he pulled over to the side of the road and started smoking crack. This enraged Brittany, who began yelling at him and slapped him on the arm. This angered Jack, and he started punching Brittany. He admitted to punching her in the face and head at least twice, because she tried to intervene and stop him from smoking. After Brittany was beaten, she started making gasping and gurgling sounds. Meanwhile, Jack was getting high as blood flowed from her nose and mouth. When he finally paid attention to her, Brittany had stopped breathing. He realized she was dead and decided to get rid of the body. However, the authorities didn't believe his story because the medical examiner found signs of strangulation on Brittany's body that Jack had left out. Additionally, he couldn't explain why Brittany was found without any clothes. The prosecution thought the crime was motivated by sexual intentions, and an Ocean County grand jury accused Jack of murder on February 9, 2005. Jack later admitted to purposely and knowingly causing serious bodily injury that resulted in death on October 18, 2005. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison without parole on January 13, 2006. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ekaterina Bauman. Ekaterina Bauman was born on May 13, 1989 in Leningrad, a city in Russia that would later be renamed St. Petersburg. In 2009, when she was 20, Ekaterina went on vacation to Turkey with her family, which marked the beginning of a series of events that would ultimately end in tragedy. It was during this trip that she met Walter Bauman, a German citizen 13 years her senior. Notably, Walter was fluent in Russian, having been born in Kazakhstan, a country that, like Russia, was part of the USSR until 1991. Walter, who had been educated in Germany and was financially successful, struggled with his personal life. Despite his desire to find the perfect partner, he himself fell short of being an ideal catch. Still living with his parents, Walter paid little attention to his appearance and often dressed sloppily, making him unattractive to many. He frequently met women online, mostly from Russia, and had been chatting with one particular woman for a while. Eventually, he decided to visit Russia to meet her in person. However, when they finally met, Walter failed to make a good impression, and she lost interest in continuing their relationship. That's why his friends were stunned when he had a holiday romance in Turkey. Ekaterina was a young and beautiful woman who could have had numerous admirers, yet she chose Walter. This romantic love story began like many others, with two lonely hearts feeling an undeniable attraction to each other. After returning to their respective homes, Ekaterina to Russia and Walter to Germany, they continued to communicate through social media and lengthy phone calls. Walter told his friends about Ekaterina's kind nature and beauty, and how they would spend hours talking on the phone and even exchange poetry. He would occasionally visit her in St. Petersburg, investing a significant amount of money in these trips. Ekaterina was in her second year of university in St. Petersburg when Walter's serious intentions led him to help her transfer to Hamburg University. This resulted in Ekaterina leaving Russia for Germany in 2010. In Bremerhaven, people described her as a bright, attractive, and lively young woman. Despite the distance, she remained in close contact with her family back in Russia. Ekaterina continued her business administration studies, which she had begun in Russia. She enjoyed running, practicing yoga, and seeking out peaceful spots. A few months later, Ekaterina and Walter got married. According to Alexander, a friend of Walter's who had experience as a wedding photographer, their ceremony was lavish. He recalled that Ekaterina was the happiest and most stunning bride he had ever seen, and the celebration was certainly expensive. The registration took place at a lighthouse, after which they rode away in a grand white horse-drawn carriage, a sight unlike any in Germany. Despite the small guest list, which seemed unusual, the wedding came to a close before dawn. Walter and Ekaterina's wedding photo exudes happiness. Walter appears as a supportive husband, while Ekaterina tenderly hugs him and beams with joy. They seem like two people perfectly suited for each other. As they embarked on their new life together, their story resembled a fairy tale. However, instead of a grand castle, they moved in with Walter's parents. This marked the beginning of Ekaterina's challenges in Germany. Living with her in-laws proved difficult. The fairy tale illusion started to crumble. Walter's mother, a tough and influential figure, would play a crucial role in how this story unfolds. It's essential to provide some background on her. Ekaterina's mother-in-law, Ludmila Bauman, lived in Kazakhstan for the first 38 years of her life. She excelled as a student and went on to hold various jobs, including assistant chemist-technologist, chemical engineer, and middle school teacher. At 18, she got married and had a son, who became the center of her universe. Ludmila's family had German ancestry, which led them to leave Kazakhstan for Germany, where they settled in Bremerhaven. She worked at a marine institute dedicated to researching global warming and participated in around 25 expeditions, including Arctic explorations. Ludmila's immigration story inspired many fellow immigrants in Germany, earning her a place of honor with her portrait displayed at the Immigration Center in Bremerhaven. Ludmila struggled to come to terms with her son Walter being a grown man in his 30s. She would frequently call him, inquiring about his whereabouts and when he would return home, due to her overprotectiveness, as a result of him being her only child. Walter worked at the port, earning a substantial income of around 4,000 euros a month, which often required him to work on weekends and holidays. While not a workaholic, he was frugal and saved most of his earnings. When Ekaterina became pregnant in 2017, Walter decided to allocate a small portion of his savings to purchase a house, allowing them to move out of his parents' home. Ludmila's interference in their marriage and criticism of Ekaterina's role as a homemaker further strained their relationship, making it difficult for the young couple to establish their independence. The move did not improve Walter and Ekaterina's relationship. Ludmila, Walter's mother, remained a constant presence in their home, interfering in all aspects of her son's life. After their daughter was born, the tension between Walter and Ekaterina increased, with Walter becoming more controlling and physically abusive. The authorities were initially informed about the Baumann family's domestic violence issues, but the case was quickly closed after the couple claimed to have reconciled. However, the abuse persisted. Walter secretly recorded arguments with Ekaterina, accusing her of being a bad mother and mentally unstable. In fall 2020, Ekaterina reached out to a support center for domestic violence victims after leaving Walter with their daughter. Desperate to win them back, Walter promised to change, and Ekaterina eventually forgave him and returned home with their daughter. Despite this, the fighting between the spouses continued. Whenever Walter acknowledged his wrongdoing, he would give Ekaterina gifts or plan a family trip. Not only did Walter's attitude towards Ekaterina change, but also towards their child. Walter exerted total control over his daughter. When at home, he insisted on keeping her in his sight at all times. Even at 3 years old, he wouldn't let her out of his arms when they went out together. He halved his working hours at the port to free up more time with his daughter. He'd take her to kindergarten and pick her up in the evening. He even cooked for her and had her sleep in the parents' room at night. Those who knew Walter well regarded him as a calculating individual with a flair for drama. He was skilled at manipulating people, and accumulating wealth was a top priority for him. He often came across as anxious and impatient. After Ekaterina had her child, she made several trips to visit her family in Russia, with Walter always by her side. He was worried that she might decide to stay in Russia permanently, which would mean he'd lose access to his daughter. As Ekaterina saw her husband's behavior become increasingly abusive, she started thinking about getting a divorce. At the same time, she realized that important documents like her identification and papers were missing. It was later discovered that Walter had taken all her documents to his mother's house, where he had left them. When Walter's mother came to visit, the couple got into another argument. As a result, Ekaterina was forced to leave the house. She was treated like trash, thrown out without any consideration. Ekaterina went to the police, and they helped resolve the situation. One time, Ekaterina and Walter had a major argument just before their child started kindergarten, which led to youth support services being notified by the administration about the family situation. As a result, the couple received 6 weeks of child education support. A family crisis counselor was assigned to work with the family and monitor the child's well-being. The counselor ultimately concluded that it was not safe for the child to be left in the care of her parents. Ekaterina's only reason for staying with her husband was because of their daughter, but she was unable to take her back to Russia because she needed Walter's consent for their daughter to leave Germany, which would mean he was not opposed to their child leaving the country. In August 2021, Ekaterina escaped with her daughter for the second time and sought help from a women's crisis center, where she reported that her husband was threatening her life. However, social services recommended placing her 5-year-old girl in an orphanage, a move that a psychologist from the Youth Affairs Department deemed extremely dire. Ekaterina initially agreed to let the Youth Affairs Service place her daughter in foster care, but Walter and his mother opposed the idea. As a result, both parents were required to take care of the child for a few days. The arrangement was that the girl would live with her father for some time, and then move to a women's shelter with her mother, on the condition that she attend kindergarten to learn German. After a few weeks, the family was reunited again. According to some Russian sources, Ekaterina had unpleasant roommates at the women's shelter, and the kindergarten the daughter was required to attend was too far away. Ekaterina returned home, but her marriage was crumbling, and she and her husband began the divorce process, living in separate rooms. Her desire to return to Russia grew, but Walter, her husband, refused to let her take their daughter, insisting the child stay with him in Germany. In December 2021, Ekaterina traveled to St. Petersburg alone, where she met a Russian pilot from Omsk, whom she had met online. Following her trip, she returned to Germany in mid-January 2022 and continued her daily online chats with the pilot, exchanging romantic messages. However, on February 4th, 2022, Ekaterina suddenly stopped contacting her family. She packed an empty suitcase, taking 13,000 euros from her husband's savings, and left. She abandoned her phone, keys, clothes, and most distressingly, her 5-year-old daughter. Walter, Ekaterina's husband, gave the following account to the police on February 6, 2022, after Ekaterina's parents were unable to contact her for 2 days and requested the German police to perform a welfare check. Ekaterina's mother, Svetlana, explained to journalists that they discovered her disappearance in an unusual manner, as they couldn't reach her for several days. According to Walter, he last saw Ekaterina on February 5th and assumed she wasn't responding because she had no money on her balance. The entire city launched a massive search for Ekaterina, scouring every inch of the city, posting flyers, and examining every possible scenario. Amidst the flurry of activity, one person who seemed remarkably unconcerned was Walter. While others were busy plastering the city with missing person posters, Walter was engrossed in renovating his house. It took 4 days for the police to finally investigate the Baumann family home, where Ekaterina was last seen. By that time, Walter had completed the renovations, including painting the floors in the guest room and replacing the couch. Moreover, he was observed buying a large quantity of cleaning supplies from a local store. During the investigation, the police discovered that the surveillance footage from the house's video cameras had mysteriously vanished. They conducted a 3-hour search of the house, accompanied by a detection dog that was led through the garage and the house. The dog exhibited slight agitation in the garage, but failed to provide any concrete indication. Initial tests by the crime scene investigators yielded no evidence within the house or garage. However, they did find a knife and an electric shocker in the cluttered car, which were seized as potential evidence. The officers were struck by Walter's apparent lack of concern for his missing wife. Instead, he seemed more interested in gaining sole custody of their 5-year-old daughter in the event of her wife's absence. Despite the ongoing search efforts, no signs of Ekaterina were found, and it was as if she had vanished into thin air. The police knew that it was highly unlikely for a young mother to abandon her daughter, personal documents, and phone in a foreign country. Walter's statement that Ekaterina had left with an empty suitcase only fueled the police's suspicion. The mysterious disappearance of Ekaterina sent shockwaves throughout the city and beyond. Even strangers, including women who had never met Ekaterina, banded together to search for her, vowing to continue until the truth was uncovered. 2 weeks after Ekaterina's disappearance, a massive search effort was organized, with around 400 volunteers, including rescue dogs, scouring Bremerhaven in North Germany. The incident sparked a huge reaction on social media, and Ekaterina's family managed to draw attention to her disappearance in Russia, with the story being featured on major Russian TV channels. Ekaterina's mother revealed to journalists that her daughter had been in a 12-year relationship with Walter, but for the past year and a half, their marriage had been marked by constant arguing, with Walter physically abusing Ekaterina on multiple occasions. She claimed that Walter had isolated Ekaterina from others, taken away her identification documents and bank cards, and prohibited her from meeting anyone. On March 1st, 2022, a disturbing discovery was made 25 days after Ekaterina's disappearance. In Bremerhaven, a passerby out for a walk found a strange suitcase that had washed up on the River Weser shore. The gruesome contents included human body parts packed in garbage bags, but not all of the remains were found. Tragically, The victim was identified as 32-year-old Ekaterina Bauman. In a chilling twist, the suitcase was found near the same lighthouse where Ekaterina had exchanged her vows. The discovery of the suitcase was a crucial breakthrough in the investigation, as it could have easily floated out to the North Sea, leaving Ekaterina's fate a mystery forever. Instead, her loved ones were forced to bid a final farewell to their beloved daughter, mother, and friend. Following the discovery of the body, the family's house was searched for a second time, and forensic experts spent several days collecting and analyzing evidence. The police investigation uncovered a trove of suspicious items, including a bottle of strong sedative found in Ekaterina's blood, single-use gloves, foil, adhesive tapes, and large quantities of garbage bags and cleaning products. In the garage and shed, investigators found canisters of acetic acid, solvents, and bleach, as well as a set of suitcase keys and the pink scarf Ekaterina wore in her last selfie. Notably, the police found very few of Ekaterina's personal belongings, and most of her clothes had been discarded. A cherished wedding photo, a reminder of happier times, was hidden behind the piano. In a surprising twist, the white jacket Ekaterina wore in her last selfie was discovered in a trash container at the workplace of Ludmila Bauman, Walter's mother. Ekaterina's life tragically came to an end on Friday, February 4, 2022. That evening, at around 4:30 p.m., she decided to take a 10-minute walk, wearing a light-colored jacket and yellow skirt, which was captured by her neighbor's security cameras. The family then had dinner together, during which Ekaterina drank 1 glass of wine while Walter consumed the rest, leading him to retire to bed at around 8 p.m. According to official court records, Ekaterina's phone signal was last detected at 7:41 p.m. Later, at 8:25 p.m., she made a video call to her new romantic partner from her computer, appearing to be in a good mood. She promised to call him again after putting her child to bed, but unfortunately, she never made that call, nor did she contact anyone else that evening. 2 hours later, her Russian pilot acquaintance sent her a goodnight message, which remained unread. A subsequent forensic investigation revealed that Ekaterina had passed away approximately 2 hours after dinner, as confirmed by the analysis of her stomach contents. The autopsy showed traces of strong sedatives and alcohol in her bloodstream. Furthermore, the forensic experts discovered that her hyoid bone was broken and the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The examination also revealed that very sharp tools were used to inflict additional injuries on her body. The next morning, Walter briefly opened his car door at 7:22 a.m. Later, at 10:20 a.m., he drove off and did not return until 4:49 p.m. 3 days later, Walter phoned his wife to perpetuate the story that she had abandoned him. He also sent her several texts, inquiring about her whereabouts with the question, "Where are you?" Before Ekaterina vanished, she and her husband Walter were in frequent and intense contact through WhatsApp daily conversations. However, after February 4th, all communication between them abruptly stopped, which was highly unusual. In mid-February, Walter took his car to auto service, instructing an employee to meticulously clean the interior from top to bottom. On August 26, 2022, the trial commenced. The prosecutor alleged that Walter spiked his wife's drink with sedatives, then strangled her once she fell asleep. The prosecution posited that Walter's motive was his fear of losing custody of their daughter in the event of divorce, as well as the potential financial losses. It was revealed that bloodstains were discovered in the garage, which Walter had attempted to clean according to internet advice. The blood was found hidden under the shelf on the floor, on the stairs, and in the seams. Moreover, despite thorough cleaning, bloodstains were also detected on the carpet in the trunk of his car. Experts from the Institute of Forensic Medicine confirmed that Ekaterina's blood was present in all the areas mentioned. The police seized Walter's phone and computer, which provided crucial answers. Prior to the tragic event, Walter conducted numerous online searches, including queries about avoiding punishment for taking a life, dissolving meat with acid, and reading others' WhatsApp messages. In the period from December 2021 to February 2022, he made approximately 500 searches, strongly indicating that he planned the crime. On the day of Ekaterina's disappearance, Walter searched for electric shocker twice. Forensic experts discovered signs of electrocution on Ekaterina's body, leading investigators to believe Walter used a shocker to check if his wife was still alive. During the trial, Walter wore his wedding ring and claimed to be a widower. For 2 months, he remained silent, refusing to comment on the charges. Occasionally, when witnesses testified, he would cover his ears, pretending the testimony didn't concern him. The only time he showed emotion was when his mother testified, and he even cried. He folded his hands as if in prayer, begging his mother to get me out of here in a letter, and it seemed she agreed to help him during her testimony. Ludmila Bauman claimed responsibility for taking Ekaterina's life, not her son. She visited her son's house in the middle of the night, responding to his request to care for her granddaughter. Upon arrival, she found Ekaterina deeply asleep on the couch. Ludmila tried to wake her, but Ekaterina awoke and hit her in the face, sparking a fight. According to Ludmila, she choked Ekaterina during the altercation. She also admitted to handling Ekaterina's body after the fact. Despite her confession, Ludmila described Ekaterina as a beloved daughter figure, leading to speculation that her immense love for her son might have driven her to take the fall for him. Ludmila walked out of the courtroom a free woman, despite having incriminated herself. The jury and the prosecutor's office didn't buy her story, thinking she was trying to shield her son. Even seasoned lawyers were stunned by Ludmila's bold move. Her own attorney demanded her arrest, while her son's lawyers called for Walter's release, but it didn't happen. Ludmila remained free, while her son stayed behind bars. But she refused to give up. She penned a letter to the court, explaining in detail what she'd done with the body. Again, she swore her son was innocent and asked to be questioned further and charged. But the court wouldn't budge, still doubting her. Ludmila's involvement in the crime was established when she provided information that led to the discovery of a missing fragment, which was not found in the suitcase. The accuracy of her tip was confirmed when the police found another weighted bag. Furthermore, data from Ludmila's phone pedometer revealed that she had walked 220 yards around 0:40 a.m. on the night of the murder, corroborating evidence from neighbors, video cameras that showed a person passing by Walter's and Ekaterina's house. Additionally, Walter's father's phone activity suggested that he had driven Ludmila to the son's house, contradicting his initial claim of being asleep. It was later determined that Ekaterina was already deceased when Ludmila arrived at the son's house, which meant that Ludmila had given false testimony. Although she may not have actively participated in the murder, Ludmila was present during the subsequent events and helped conceal evidence, making her an accomplice. However, under German law, Ludmila was not arrested or charged for her role in the crime. As the verdict drew near, Ludmila grew increasingly desperate in her efforts to exonerate her son. She penned a second letter to the judge, claiming responsibility for the crime and stating that she, not Walter, was the perpetrator. In the letter, Ludmila alleged that she had harbored a deep hatred for Ekaterina and had concocted a plan to make it seem as though she had poisoned herself over her unrequited love for a Russian pilot. Ludmila claimed that she had entered her son's house to leave a farewell note written in Ekaterina's name, but Ekaterina had awoken, forcing Ludmila to strangle her. The court, however, remained unconvinced by Ludmila's confession, as all evidence pointed to Walter's guilt. Throughout the proceedings, Walter remained silent until, in one of the final hearings, he read from his 230-page statement detailing his life in Kazakhstan, his relationships, and his love for Ekaterina. Despite touching on the tumultuous nature of their relationship, including the emotional burnout and psychological issues that led to frequent quarrels, Walter only briefly mentioned the fateful night, stating that he was asleep while his mother took Ekaterina's life and dragged her body to the garage. Walter unequivocally blamed his mother for the heinous crime, accusing her of betrayal, manipulation, and landed him in prison. Addressing the judge, he implored that his daughter, having lost her mother, must not be forced to lose her father as well. The most disturbing aspect of this story is not the horrific details of the crime itself, but the fact that the entire ordeal played out in front of the couple's 5-year-old daughter. As a result, the Russian grandmother, Svetlana, has been prohibited from contacting her granddaughter, who has been placed in a German foster family. Walter was at home with his daughter when the traumatic event occurred, leaving the child with severe psychological scars. The girl, who is now living in a special facility for traumatized children under a new name, often mutters to herself, pointing to her head and forearms, saying she witnessed everything. Svetlana is fighting to obtain guardianship of her granddaughter, but German authorities have denied her even phone contact. On May 23, 2023, when the verdict was announced, Ekaterina's daughter was 6 years old. Walter Baumann received a life sentence, although German law allows for parole eligibility after 15 years. Ekaterina's ashes were buried in her hometown of St. Petersburg. The case of Ludmila Baumann, Walter's wife, remains open, and it's possible that she may be charged as an accomplice, but no such charges have been filed yet. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Davis. Michelle Ann Cosner Davis was born in Iowa on December 15, 1966. By 2008, at 41 years old, she lived in Des Moines with her 3 kids. Her divorce was nearly finalized and she was eager to start anew. Michelle had already taken steps towards independence, moving into her own apartment and obtaining a restraining order against her husband, Randy Davis. The years leading up to the divorce had been marked by tension and strain within the family. Michelle was a friendly and adventurous person who had a passion for motorcycles. At her job as a secretary for a trucking company, she was well respected and commanded authority. On Thursday, September 11, 2008, Michelle was at work, and her co-workers noticed a significant change in her demeanor after her husband left her. She seemed to have shed a burden that had been weighing her down for years. In a good mood, Michelle wrapped up all her tasks and left the office around 4:30 p.m. After a short time, eyewitnesses started calling 911 to report a serious accident on Interstate 235. They told the operator that a Mercury Sable car had flipped over and a woman was still strapped into the driver's seat with her seatbelt. Tragically, the woman was unconscious, and despite the efforts of the paramedics who arrived at the scene, she could not be saved. The woman who lost her life was identified as Michelle Davis. After arriving at the accident scene, the police initially concluded that Michelle lost control of her vehicle, leading to the crash. However, they reversed this theory just a day later. Forensic experts subsequently determined that Michelle's death was not caused by a head injury sustained during the rollover, but rather by a gunshot wound to the head. The bullet was extracted and sent for analysis, with the hope of tracing the perpetrator. The investigators on this case were dealing with something entirely unprecedented. As they awaited the ballistic examination results, local authorities took proactive measures to safeguard the public. They considered the possibility that Michelle might have been a random target, not premeditated. This raised the alarming prospect of a shooter who wouldn't stop at just one victim. Given the high volume of traffic on the interstate, any driver could potentially become the next target for the unstable perpetrator. It was essential to crack the case quickly, and so the police increased their patrols throughout the city. When detectives realized Michelle's death was not an accident, they revisited the crime scene to try to determine the shooter's whereabouts and if they had left any clues behind. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded nothing. The police failed to recover the cartridge case or any other evidence that could aid the investigation. To make matters worse, the initial assumption that Michelle was a car accident victim led the traffic services to clear the site, which meant that even if there were any evidence, it was likely destroyed and irretrievable by the time the truth came to light. Despite these setbacks, the detectives didn't give up and pinned their hopes on reviewing the traffic camera recordings. These days, CCTV cameras often prove instrumental in helping the police crack cases, and this one was no exception. With the traffic camera recordings at their disposal, the investigators dove right in. First, they needed to locate the recording from the camera nearest the crime scene and rewind it to when the 911 calls started coming in. Half an hour later, the investigators finally found what they were looking for. The video showed Michelle's car upside down, but the footage was poor quality, resembling a slideshow with separate alternating pictures and intervals in between. As a result, the investigators only had a few usable shots, none of which revealed what led to Michelle's car rolling over. This was a disappointing development, as the investigators thought they had finally stumbled upon a crucial clue, only to be left with false hopes. The police still needed to review the remaining camera recordings and search for potential eyewitnesses. Meanwhile, the investigator handling the Michelle Davis case visited her family to break the news that her death was not an accident, as initially thought. This revelation left Michelle's family in shock. Michelle's mother, Patty, had passed away before her. Her father, Michael Lee Cosner, was now grieving the loss of his second daughter. His first daughter, Cheryl Sue Cosner, Michelle's older sister, died in 1965 at just 1 year old. 43 years later, Michael Cosner was facing the unbearable loss of another child. Losing one's children is the ultimate tragedy for any parent. Michelle's family informed the investigator that she had been going through a series of changes in her life, but they did not think she had any financial issues. However, they suspected that the one person who could potentially harm Michelle was her estranged husband, Randy Davis, particularly since their divorce was nearly finalized, and she had obtained a restraining order against him. Meanwhile, another detective interviewed Michelle's colleagues at her workplace and discovered that she was having a close relationship with a coworker named Matt Jorgensen, following her separation from her husband. According to Michelle's friend, the feelings between Michelle and Matt were mutual. Since Michelle was still in the process of divorcing Randy Davis, she and Matt decided to keep their relationship private, only sharing it with a select few colleagues and close friends. The police now had two potential suspects in their investigation, Randy Davis and Matt Jorgensen. However, all attempts to contact Randy were met with failure, as every time they called him, the call went straight to voicemail. On the other hand, the investigators were able to meet with Matt, where they questioned him about his whereabouts on the day Michelle died. Matt was cooperative, openly admitting to having had a romantic relationship with Michelle. He claimed that they never had any arguments or fights. Matt was visibly shaken by Michelle's death and provided every detail of his activities on the day she died. After verifying his alibi, the police were able to eliminate him as a suspect. The ballistic examination results revealed that the crime was committed with a .22 caliber rifle. According to experts, the shot was fired at close range. Given that the incident occurred while Michelle was driving on the interstate, police suspected that the shooter was likely in another vehicle that was driving alongside Michelle's car. At the same time, a new suspect emerged in the case. The police received a tip-off from an insurance company claiming that Michelle's brother, Todd, was seeking payment under her life insurance policy. While insurance-related murders aren't rare, the question was whether this case fit the pattern. Could Todd have killed his sister for the payout? To investigate, the detective visited Todd's house to ask some questions. As the detective pressed Todd about his whereabouts at the time of Michelle's death, it dawned on Todd that he was a suspect. Todd recounted his activities on the day his sister died. He explained that their family was struggling financially and couldn't afford a decent funeral, which is why he contacted the insurance company. He needed the money for Michelle's funeral expenses. The police verified Todd's alibi and discovered that he was in a different part of the city when Michelle died, ruling him out as the shooter. However, Todd still gave the police information that allowed them to find another suspect, Michelle's stepson, Josh. When Michelle married Randy, he already had a son from a previous marriage. At the time of Michelle's death, Josh was already an adult. He was a Marine who returned home from the army shortly before someone fatally wounded Michelle on the road. Josh knew how to handle weapons, which made him one of the suspects. The police started analyzing whether Josh had motives for committing this crime. The police received a new lead when a woman reported seeing a suspicious vehicle on Interstate 235 at the same time Michelle's car crashed. She described the vehicle as a red Ford F-150 pickup truck, driven erratically, swerving between lanes, as if the driver was chasing someone. The driver was an adult white male wearing a baseball cap, but the woman couldn't provide any additional details. The new information appeared significant, so the investigators decided to investigate further. They re-examined the traffic camera footage, this time focusing on whether a red pickup truck was in the vicinity. The woman's tip proved accurate. The footage showed a red pickup truck tailing Michelle from her workplace. However, the poor video quality prevented the police from identifying the driver's face or the truck's license plates. After reviewing additional camera recordings, the investigators determined that the red pickup truck had been following Michelle's exact route, mirroring her every move. The similarity was unlikely to be a coincidence. Furthermore, as Michelle approached the location of her death, the pickup truck was hot on her heels. This evidence hinted that the perpetrator may have fired the fatal shot while driving, and several suspects were being considered. Detectives quickly learned that Randy Davis, Michelle's husband, owned a red pickup truck that matched the description of the one seen near the crime scene. They immediately went to his house to investigate. Although Randy was not at home, his son Josh, a Marine with professional weapons training, was present. Josh told detectives that on the day of Michelle's death, he and his sister had gone shopping, returned home, and spent the evening watching TV. He also mentioned that his father, Randy, arrived home around 5:30 p.m. that day. However, detectives found Josh's alibi unconvincing and suspected that he might have a motive for the crime. Michelle's decision to pursue half the house value in the divorce proceedings had likely upset Josh, who stood to lose a portion of his inheritance. While these suspicions seemed plausible, there was no physical evidence to support them, and without evidence, an arrest and charges were impossible. While Michelle's family was preparing for her funeral, the police were actively searching for new leads in the case. They visited all the shops and gas stations along the route from her workplace to the location where her body was found, hoping to obtain additional surveillance footage. A few miles from the company where Michelle worked, the police discovered crucial footage at a store that proved to be a significant breakthrough. The store's surveillance camera had captured part of the parking lot, and on the day of Michelle's death, September 11, 2008, it showed a red pickup truck belonging to Randy Davis parking at the entrance around 4 p.m. Although the footage revealed the driver getting out of the truck and entering the store, the poor quality made it impossible for investigators to determine whether the driver was Randy or his son Josh. Further analysis of the footage revealed that over the next 30 minutes, the pickup truck returned to the store several times, but the driver remained in the vehicle. The last time the pickup truck was seen near the store was when Michelle left work, which raised even more questions for the investigators. The police, unable to identify a suspect, reached out to Randy Davis, who eventually made contact and came to the police station. There, the investigators informed him of his rights and asked about his activities on September 11th. Randy mentioned his difficult divorce from Michelle, his wife of 17 years, and claimed to have been at work that day. When questioned about his arrival time at home, Randy hesitated before stating he got home at 3:45 p.m., which contradicted the surveillance footage and his son Josh's testimony, who said his father arrived around 5:30 p.m. The investigators then revealed to Randy that Michelle had died from a gunshot wound, not a car crash, information that had not been previously disclosed. Randy showed little reaction to this news, and when the police asked when he last saw Michelle, he requested a lawyer, ending the conversation. Due to the lack of significant evidence, including the murder weapon, the investigation had no choice but to release him. On September 15, 2008, 4 days after Michelle's death, her family and friends, including Randy Davis, gathered for her funeral. Randy tried to show that her death was a heavy loss for him, even bursting into tears at some point. Help arrived from an unexpected quarter when Josh Davis walked into the police station, accompanied by his lawyer, and expressed his desire to make a statement. Josh claimed that upon returning home from his sister's house, he found his father Randy waiting for him, holding a gun. Randy warned Josh that it would be better for him to stay back, and Josh grasped the implication that his father was trying to prevent him from entering the house, but ultimately failed to do so. Randy drove into the garage and confessed to Josh that he had shot Michelle. He was upset because his wife was filing for divorce and suing him for part of their property, which he refused to accept. On September 11, 2008, Randy took drastic action. He parked his red pickup truck outside the store where Michelle worked and waited for her to leave. Randy drove past the store multiple times, worried that he might miss his opportunity. This is why he appeared on the store's CCTV footage several times after Michelle left work. Eventually, he followed her and waited for the perfect moment to strike. When the time came, he rolled down the passenger side window and fired. Based on Josh's testimony, the police arrested Randy Davis for the murder of Michelle, and he was initially charged with first-degree murder. However, prior to the trial, Randy pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree deprivation of life in exchange for a shorter sentence. As a result, in 2010, Randy Davis, then 53 years old, was sentenced to 50 years in prison. By pleading guilty, Randy avoided a trial. Michelle's brother, Todd Kozner, expressed mixed emotions about the outcome. While we may not have received full justice without a trial, we did get what we wanted, an admission of guilt from Randy, Todd said. He emphasized the devastating impact Randy's actions had on their family. Randy was like family to me for 17 years, and I cared deeply for him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Christina Ann Thompson Harris. Christina Ann Thompson and Jason Thomas Harris, 40, had been married for 11 years as of 2014, having tied the knot in 2003 following a 5-year courtship. The couple welcomed their first child in 2009, which brought about significant lifestyle changes. Despite the challenges that came with parenthood and daily responsibilities, they appeared to be content with their new life. Christina managed the household and cared for their child, while Jason worked at a plastics factory. As their child grew older, Christina had the opportunity to contribute to the family income by getting a job. However, in May 2014, she had to take maternity leave due to her second pregnancy. Their daughter was born healthy, but tragically, she would only get to see her mother through photographs as she grew up. On September 29, 2014, Jason had a brief conversation with his wife Christina before leaving for work. Despite being unwell with a cold and severe cough that had disrupted her sleep, Christina reassured Jason she was okay. However, a few hours later, Jason grew concerned when Christina didn't answer his call to check on her. Unsuccessful in reaching his wife, Jason asked a neighbor to visit their home and check on Christina, explaining her condition and unavailability. The neighbor found the front door unlocked, and upon entering the bedroom, discovered Christina lying unresponsive on the bed. The neighbor promptly called 911 and then sought help from another neighbor, a registered nurse, who sadly confirmed Christina's death after checking her pulse. 2 days after Christina's death, the medical examiner determined that the cause was an overdose of a banned substance. This verdict stunned her family and friends, who were convinced she had never touched illegal drugs. Christina's mother, Kathy May, disputed the finding and told the police that her daughter had seemed well when they last met, the day before her death. The police then questioned Jason Harris's claim that his wife was battling a cold. According to Kathy May, Christina had confided in her about the difficulties in her marriage to Jason, who was unhappy but reluctant to divorce due to concerns about child support and custody of their 2 kids. The neighbors who discovered Christina's body provided the police with some interesting information. They claimed that Jason had told them that the night before his wife's death, he had made her a bowl of cereal with milk, and while they were eating, Christina suddenly lost consciousness and dropped the plate. The police were aware that it would be difficult for Christina's loved ones to accept that someone they knew so well had a secret dark side. However, as the investigation progressed, the police began to question whether Christina had indeed taken any illegal substances. Despite the official findings, Christina's family refused to give up, convinced that Jason Harris was involved in her death. Christina's mother and sisters persuaded the police to test her breast milk, which led to a historic first in Michigan, using breast milk as evidence. Despite the trust of her family, neighbors, and colleagues that Christina didn't use illegal substances, her milk was tested. Notably, her workplace and the hospital where she gave birth to her second child had already tested her for prohibited substances, with negative results. At the time of Christina's death, her second child was 4 months old, and she had been breastfeeding. Both Christina's mother and Harris confirmed that she was cautious about her consumption due to breastfeeding, as she didn't want to harm her baby. Christina would express and freeze her breast milk, with some bags stored at her mother's house. The police examined 3 dated bags of frozen milk, which revealed no traces of banned substances. The expert analysis included milk samples frozen shortly before Christina's death, indicating she didn't consume the substance that caused her death. Only one person claimed that Christina had used banned substances, and that was Jason Harris's sister. This led investigators to take a closer look at Jason and consider the possibility that Christina's death was a deliberate act of deprivation of life. The investigation was slow going, and it's unclear how it would have turned out if Christina's family hadn't been actively involved in uncovering the truth. Christina's mother constantly reminded the Davidson police about her daughter, and in August 2016, almost 2 years after Christina's death, Kathy Mays successfully got the Davidson police to hand the case over to the Michigan State Police, with new investigators taking over. As the story unfolded, they discovered a lot of information about Jason Harris's character and behavior before and after his wife's death. Harris had been having multiple affairs, and Christina was aware of them, confiding in family and coworkers that Harris had been texting another woman even while she was in the hospital giving birth to their youngest child via C-section. Christina told a coworker that if she turned up dead, it would be because of Harris, and when asked if she was serious, she confirmed that she was. Harris told his coworkers that he doubted the paternity of their second child and often complained that after giving birth, Christina was depressed, staying in bed and refusing to go to work. He also frequently complained about her nagging him. One of Harris's coworkers believed that Harris might have told the police that he had expressed a wish for Christina to be dead. He described Harris and Christina's relationship as toxic, recalling that they frequently argued. One of the most astonishing aspects of this case was Jason Harris's openness about wanting to get rid of his wife, Christina. Despite making attempts to harm her, nobody took his words and actions seriously until her death. Harris purchased substances which he mixed into her drinks on at least 2 occasions. However, Christina detected an unusual taste and refused to consume the beverages. He then asked a coworker for a substance that would not alter the taste or smell of drinks or food, claiming he wanted to knock her out so she wouldn't feel anything. When Harris told a coworker that Christina didn't drink the tainted water because of its funny taste, the coworker declined to provide him with more pills. The coworker testified that Harris had told him he wanted Christina to stop nagging him, but the coworker thought Harris was joking. Harris even told a coworker that he had hired someone to kill Christina, but the hitman was arrested before he could carry out the task. Harris then asked the same coworker to kill Christina in exchange for $10,000 from her $100,000 life insurance policy. The coworker refused, believing Harris was venting frustrations and that the offer was merely a poor joke. He remembered the conversation as Harris saying, "I'm tired of her. I'm going to get rid of her." On September 29, 2014, Harris dropped off his 2 children at daycare on his way to work. Later that morning, he sent a text to a neighbor asking her to check on his wife Christina because she wasn't answering his calls. The neighbor arrived at the house and saw the family van in the driveway, but Christina didn't come to the door. The neighbor entered the house and found Christina lying unresponsive in bed. She asked Harris if she should try to wake her up, and he said Christina had probably overslept and that he was on his way home. The neighbor then went back inside and found Christina feeling cold, with foam coming from her mouth and nose. She called 911 and another neighbor who was a registered nurse. The 911 operator asked if there were any needles present, but the neighbor didn't see any. The registered nurse neighbor testified that Christina was cold, stiff, had no pulse, and had white foam coming from her mouth. She didn't attempt to resuscitate Christina because she was already dead. When the paramedics arrived, they pronounced Christina dead at the scene. Harris informed his supervisor that he had requested a neighbor to check on Christina and that he needed to return home because Christina was unresponsive when he arrived at the house. However, witnesses reported that Harris did not appear concerned or rushed, and he entered the house without notifying the neighbor he had asked to check on Christina. Later that morning, Harris contacted Christina's supervisor at work, informing her that Christina had passed away the previous night and inquiring about collecting the $100,000 death benefit on Christina's life insurance policy through her employer. One of the women with whom Harris was intimate told investigators that Harris reached out to her on the day of Christina's death, claiming that his wife had died from taking an excessive amount of a banned substance, implying that he knew the cause of Christina's death before the medical examiner's report. That evening, the neighbor Harris had asked to check on Christina saw him in the driveway. Harris stated that Christina was not the angel her parents thought she was, and that their child would soon learn all the good and bad about Christina. He claimed that Christina had dropped her bowl of cereal and that he told her to go to bed. Harris also told the neighbor that his wife was restless, tossing, turning, and thrashing around during the night, and that he had heard her cough before he left for work, wondering if that had been her last breath. Harris told a police officer that Christina had been coughing a lot when he left the home, and that Christina had fallen asleep while eating cereal the night before her death. Finally, Harris informed Christina's mother that Christina had complained about her water tasting of chemicals before she died. In this case, a key motive was financial gain. Within a week of Christina's death, Harris and his mother personally visited Christina's workplace to ask about her life insurance payout. Moreover, Harris received a $20,000 death benefit from his employer's life insurance policy soon after Christina's death. One of Harris's mistresses moved in with him and his children. Although Christina's mother thought the mistress moved in after the funeral, Harris's neighbor testified that the mistress had already moved in before the funeral. The neighbor also stated that Harris's adult children from a previous marriage moved into the house just days after Christina's death. Police found that Jason Harris had bought a plane ticket to Rhode Island 9 days after Christina's death to visit a woman he had exchanged over 5,800 texts with. The county medical examiner, Dr. Brian Hunter, sent Christina's post-mortem blood and urine samples to a lab for testing. Initially, Dr. Hunter thought Christina's death was an accident, but there were no needle marks on her body, and investigators didn't find any drug residue or rolling paper near the bed where she died. In 2016, the Michigan State Police took over the investigation into Christina's death. Later, in 2019, after being questioned in a wrongful death lawsuit brought by Christina's family, and after reviewing the police file, Dr. Hunter changed the manner of Christina's death on her death certificate and post-mortem report from accidental to homicide. The police charged Harris with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance causing death. He was refused bail. Nicholas Robinson, Harris's attorney, said his client has pled not guilty to this matter and looks forward to contesting these charges. By the time of his arrest, Harris had lost his job due to a positive test for banned substances. The efforts made by Kathy Mays to ensure that law enforcement agencies punish the perpetrator of her daughter's death did not go unnoticed. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton said that a few years back, he started receiving Facebook and email messages from a woman from Davidson, claiming that her daughter had recently died and that it was not an accident. The woman, Kathy Mays, was able to capture Layton's attention, and authorities began reviewing the death of her daughter. Kathy Mays recalled the words her daughter's mother wrote in an email. "Mr. Prosecutor, you are my last hope, the last chance we have to see justice through for my daughter. Please help me." Layton stated, "I was, and remain to this day, thoroughly convinced that her daughter's death was not accidental, but rather the result of foul play. However, it was Mays's relentless pursuit of justice for her daughter that ultimately led to this moment, and it is her effort that prompted Layton and his office to present her with the Crime Victim Advocate of the Year award." Mays thanked Layton for the award, presented to her in a room filled with about 40 people. Mays said, "The accused have well-defined rights, but the victim's rights are not so defined. Communicate through email, phone calls, talking to people, and learn the jargon that's coming at you from the professionals. You are your loved one's best advocate." Mays recounted that in September 2014, she received a call informing her that her daughter had not woken up, and instantly she suspected her husband's involvement. Through her journey to becoming a victim's advocate, a role she was previously unaware of, Mays shared the valuable lessons she learned. Victims should not take for granted that an investigation will occur, and even if one does, it's not guaranteed that the investigators will have the necessary expertise in the specific crime they're investigating. It's essential to be proactive rather than passive when seeking justice for your loved one. Moreover, don't expect to receive regular or progress updates. The trial started in 2021. Prosecutors alleged that Harris intentionally laced his wife's cereal with a prohibited substance, aiming to end her life. He then went to work, waited a few hours, and asked the neighbor to check on Christina Harris, seemingly wanting someone else to discover her lifeless body, thereby diverting suspicion from himself. According to the prosecutor, Harris had multiple motives for killing Christina. He was involved with other women, suspected her of infidelity, doubted the paternity of their second child, and was frustrated with her constant nagging. Harris openly confessed to multiple individuals that he was against divorce, unwilling to pay child support, and unwilling to lose custody of their children. Prior to Christina's death, he confided in a coworker that he wished she would pass away on the morning of her actual death. Harris contacted Christina's employer to inquire about a $100,000 life insurance policy, and during this conversation, he falsely claimed that Christina had died the previous night. The jury was presented with conclusive proof that Harris wanted Christina dead and had even attempted to hire an assassin. He had devised a plan to achieve this and was aware of where to obtain illegal substances. In fact, he repeatedly purchased these substances with the intention of administering them to Christina. Multiple witnesses testified during the trial that Christina refrained from recreational drug use and was meticulous about what she consumed, given her breastfeeding responsibilities. Furthermore, tests on her frozen breast milk yielded negative results for the substances, lending credence to the theory that Harris had contaminated Christina's food. Prosecution presented the results of the toxicological examination, and Dr. Judge stated that Christina's death was compatible with swallowing a substance. The prosecution dismissed the possibility of an injection because there were no injection marks or a needle found. Dr. Judge added that it was also unlikely that the substance was snorted, as neither a rolled-up dollar bill nor any paper used for this purpose was found at the scene. Jason Harris was given the opportunity to address the court, but he failed to apologize or express remorse. Instead, he maintained his innocence. The jury, however, saw through his deception and revealed him to be a selfish, murderous, and dishonest individual, as the judge remarked on November 17, 2021. The jury ultimately found 47-year-old Harris guilty on all charges brought against him. 3 weeks later, the court sentenced Harris to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Undeterred, Harris proceeded to appeal the verdict. In a statement, prosecutor David Layton extended his sincerest condolences to the family and friends of Christina Harris, describing the case as tragic and hoping that the verdict would bring some measure of comfort as they continued to mourn. Harris requested a new trial, citing his trial lawyer's ineffective assistance. Specifically, he argued that his lawyer failed to obtain an independent expert opinion on the prosecution's evidence and did not consult with an independent toxicologist. The lawyer's trial strategy had been to show that Dr. Hunter's opinion on the manner of death was based on flawed information. The prosecution responded by submitting an affidavit from Jason Harris's trial lawyer, who clarified that he had chosen not to obtain an independent expert opinion to counter the prosecution's expert witness. Instead, his strategy was to highlight that Dr. Hunter had altered his opinion on the manner of death due to being presented with inaccurate information and circumstances over a 3-year period, which was influenced by pressure from the victim's family. In February 2024, the Michigan Court of Appeals upheld Jason Harris's conviction, and as a result, he will spend the rest of his life in prison with no possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jayden Parkinson. Jayden Parkinson was born in the UK on September 26, 1996. As the youngest of 3 children in a family troubled by her parents' tumultuous relationship. According to her mother, Samantha Shuri, Jayden and her siblings witnessed many unpleasant incidents. When Jayden was just 7 years old, her parents divorced and she went to live with her father. Despite the physical distance, she remained extremely close to her mother, with whom she would talk every night over the phone, even though they lived in different places. As Jayden entered her teenage years, her life became increasingly unstable. According to Samantha, Jayden's father gave her too much freedom, allowing her to do as she pleased. As a result, she got involved with a group of people where she started smoking and drinking alcohol regularly. During this time, she alternated between living with her father and her mother. At the age of 13, she ran away from home and went to live with her mother, claiming she preferred to stay with her. In the end, the family court ruled in favor of Jayden, allowing her to remain with her mother. Jayden experienced numerous conflicts with various individuals at school, including her teachers. She resented being told what to do and having her behavior controlled. In her personal life, she was in a romantic relationship with Ben Blakely. Jayden was only 14 years old when she met Blakely, a former garbage collector. Although they didn't cohabitate since she was still a minor, He persisted in his efforts to influence her, gradually bringing about significant changes in her. Jayden was 15 when she began dating Ben, who was 20 at the time. The significant age gap understandably concerned Jayden's mother, but she was powerless to intervene. Initially, their relationship was loving and romantic, but it eventually deteriorated. The mutual understanding and affection they once shared vanished, replaced by tension and strain. Ben exerted control over every aspect of Jayden's life, dictating her appearance, from makeup to clothing choices. He isolated her from family and friends, causing Jayden to move out of her mother's house and into a hostel for women escaping domestic violence. Ben was banned from visiting the hostel, but that didn't stop him from exerting total control over her life. The couple frequently clashed, and Jayden even alerted the hostel staff that Ben had a history of aggression towards her. She was unable to make a move without his approval. Ben took her mobile phone away, convincing her that she didn't need anything or anyone else as long as she had him and his love. He prohibited her from interacting with men and monitored all her social media activity. As a result, she stopped going to school. Ben's grip on her was so tight that he even refused to let her leave her room to use the bathroom. Jayden used to have daily phone conversations with her mother, but nowadays they barely talk once or twice a month. Samantha begged her daughter to come back home and break up with Ben, but Jayden refused to listen. The reality was that Ben had a tight grip on Jayden, controlling her both emotionally and physically. There were even times when she had visible bruises on her face. On November 30th, 2013, Jayden revealed to her mother that she was pregnant, hoping the news would prompt Ben to reform his attitude towards her and his lifestyle. She believed the baby would bring them closer together, and Ben would revert to the person he was when they first met. However, Ben failed to meet her expectations. As he often did, Ben manipulated Jayden into isolating herself from friends and family, making her dependent on him alone. Without her own financial means, Jayden lost autonomy, with Ben eventually restricting her from leaving her room, even to use the bathroom. Unbeknownst to Jayden, Ben secretly dated other girls, exerting psychological and physical control over them as well. When Samantha found out her daughter Jayden was pregnant, she asked her to come back home, but Jayden refused. They had a meeting to talk it over, but Jayden was determined. She didn't want to cause her mother any more stress. After Jayden told Ben about her pregnancy, he flew into a rage and denied being the father of her baby. He even threatened to share naked photos and videos of Jayden on social media. A few days prior to her disappearance, Jayden reported Ben to the authorities, fearing he would share intimate photos and videos of her online. Ben possessed approximately 30 compromising photos and 13 explicit videos of Jayden, and she was desperate to prevent their public release. On December 3rd, Jayden failed to return to the hostel overnight, prompting the staff to launch a search effort, aware of the turmoil in her personal life. They contacted Samantha, Jayden's mother, by phone, but she was unable to provide any information about her daughter's whereabouts. Shortly after midnight on December 4th, 2013, the police received a formal missing persons report. After learning about Jayden's personal struggles, investigators attempted to reach out to Ben to see if he had any information about her disappearance. However, Ben was hostile and abruptly ended multiple calls, claiming he couldn't assist and had no idea where Jayden might be. Jayden had a troubled upbringing, marked by frequent conflicts with her family, and had a history of running away only to return home. As a result, her disappearance didn't initially seem out of the ordinary. On December 4th, the day the investigation started, police arrested Ben Blakely in the early hours, but this was not related to Jayden's disappearance. A few days earlier, Jayden had reported about Ben to the police, fearing he would post intimate photos of her online. Ben was arrested due to this incident. During his interrogation, the investigators did not know that Ben was a person of interest in Jayden Parkinson's disappearance case. Ben denied any intentions of posting Jaden's images online and was released on bail the same day. Samantha was distributing flyers featuring a picture of her daughter, Jaden, in an effort to gather information about her disappearance. She also utilized social media platforms to raise awareness about the case, hoping that someone might have witnessed something or possessed knowledge about Jaden's whereabouts. While the investigation was ongoing, the police examined surveillance footage to determine Jaden's last known whereabouts. After retrieving CCTV footage from the hostel where Jaden lived, they found that she had departed to meet Ben but did not come back. This event took place on December 3rd. Additionally, Jaden was later spotted at Oxford railway station, where CCTV footage showed her walking in with Ben, and nothing out of the ordinary occurred in the video. Following their trail, investigators discovered that Ben and Jaden took a train to Didcot, a town roughly 10 miles from Oxford. The last confirmed sighting of Jaden was at Didcot train station. Surveillance footage captured the pair leaving the station. Typically, when Jaden ran away from home, she would reach out to a family member within a day or two to let them know she was safe. But this time, there was an eerie silence. As the days went by, Jaden failed to contact her family, friends, or post on social media, a stark departure from her usual behavior. Since the CCTV footage showed her boarding a train with Ben, he became the prime suspect in her disappearance. The police did not doubt that Ben knew where Jaden was and what had happened to her. The footage showed Ben returning to the train station alone, yet no one saw Jaden alive ever again. A week after Jaden's disappearance, on December 10, 2013, the police took Ben Blakely into custody. They wanted to question him to determine what happened to Jaden after they were last seen together leaving the train station in Didcot. At the time, the police considered two possible scenarios. One, that Jaden was hiding of her own free will, and two, that Ben was holding her captive against her will at an unknown location. Ben displayed confidence during the interrogation. He claimed to be unaware of his ex-girlfriend's whereabouts, identifying her as Jaden. According to Ben, they had broken up, and she was now seeing another man. He suggested that the police should focus on speaking with this new boyfriend. Ben expressed his indifference to Jaden's current situation, stating that he had moved on and had a new girlfriend. He recommended that the police check her social media to determine her location and the people she was interacting with. Ben Blakely was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murdering Jaden, who was still missing. The police spoke to Jaden's friends to see if they knew of anywhere she might have gone, but their investigation only revealed that Jaden had drifted apart from her friends after starting a relationship with Ben. As a result, no one was aware of a potential hiding place for her. During the ongoing search for Jaden, investigators received crucial information from a taxi driver from Didcot. He said that at about 1 a.m. on December 4th, he picked up a passenger on a dirt road. He described the passenger as a young man with a large and heavy suitcase smeared with mud. The driver couldn't lift it and asked the taxi driver to help him. These circumstances made the taxi driver think about what was in the suitcase and that he could have witnessed a crime. The police investigation revealed that the taxi was summoned using Ben Blakely's mobile phone. When questioned further, Ben refused to provide any additional information. A detailed analysis of his mobile phone's location records showed that Ben had visited several sites in Didcot, including an abandoned countryside barn, which was where a taxi collected him that evening. A team of investigators, including criminologists and dog handlers, was sent to the location to conduct an investigation. It later emerged that Ben and Jaden had previously visited the area because Jaden's mother resided in Didcot, adjacent to the barn. The police discovered a bracelet that resembled the one Jaden was wearing. Trained service dogs, specialized in detecting deceased bodies, began barking inside the barn, suggesting that something was amiss, but Jaden's body was not found. This development likely had a connection to the suitcase Ben had with him when he got into the taxi. The police appealed for public assistance, requesting that anyone who saw a man carrying a large suitcase in the Didcot countryside come forward with information. Meanwhile, officers visited homes door to door and questioned residents of the houses nearest to the abandoned barn. Since the train station video footage showed Ben and Jaden were not carrying a suitcase, investigators sought to determine where Ben acquired the suitcase. On December 14th, the police finally found the answer to their question. During their investigation, they discovered that Ben Blakely's grandmother, grandfather, and younger brother Jake lived near the abandoned barn. When the police visited Ben's grandmother, the first thing she asked was if they were there about the suitcase. She explained that Ben had borrowed a suitcase from her a few days earlier, arriving in a hurry and dumping its contents on the floor without explanation. According to Ben's grandmother, he returned the suitcase 2 days later and discarded it in the barn, but it was dirty when he did so. Additionally, she mentioned that 2 shovels had gone missing, only to reappear later, covered in a thick layer of dirt. Ben's need for 2 shovels raises suspicions that he may have had an accomplice. A possible partner in crime is 17-year-old Jake Blakely, a friend of Jaden's who met Ben through their mutual friend. Several witnesses reported seeing Ben and Jake together, riding dirt bikes. As the investigation into Jaden's disappearance unfolded, Jake was arrested on suspicion of being involved in the crime. Meanwhile, the police sent the suitcase Ben had returned to his grandmother's barn to a laboratory for analysis, hoping to determine if it contained any traces of Jaden's DNA. Based on all available evidence, investigators developed a theory that Jaden was killed in an abandoned barn, then placed in a suitcase and moved to another location where the perpetrator buried her. However, due to the vast area of fields surrounding Didcot, finding Jaden's body was a daunting task. To aid in the investigation, police utilized aviation to narrow down the likely burial site. Through aerial photography, they identified 10 locations with recent significant changes to the soil surface. Although police checked several locations, it yielded no results. It wasn't until they thoroughly investigated all 10 places of interest that they finally found Jaden's body. A surprising development emerged in the case. Jake Blakely began working with the police, directing them to investigate his uncle's grave at a local cemetery in Didcot, adjacent to All Saints Church. Although the cemetery was one of 10 locations that had recently shown surface changes, it was initially considered a low priority since soil disturbances are common in such places. However, upon receiving a note from Jake suggesting that Jaden's body might be buried in his uncle's grave, the police promptly cordoned off the cemetery. Investigators were shocked by this unprecedented method of hiding a victim's body. According to reports from the English press, Ben and Jake's uncle had been buried in 2006. The new twist in this case has garnered widespread media attention. In a shocking first for the country, the victim's body was discovered in a pre-existing grave. Following the setup of a forensic tent at the cemetery, experts commenced their investigation. Tragically, Jaden's family later received the devastating news that her body had been found in the grave of Ben and Jake Blakely's uncle. She was found naked, with no clothes nearby, and her jewelry had been removed. The forensic examination revealed that Jaden had been beaten prior to her death, with finger marks on her neck indicating strangulation. The pathologist ultimately determined asphyxia to be the official cause of death. While in prison awaiting trial, Ben Blakely had a change of heart after speaking with the prison chaplain. He and his lawyer drafted a letter in which he accepted responsibility for Jaden's death, but claimed it was not premeditated. Ben's account of events was that he got into an argument with Jaden, pushed her, and she fell off a bridge near an abandoned barn. He said he tried to revive her, but was unsuccessful. Initially, he buried her body in one location, then moved it to the cemetery and reburied it in his uncle's grave. However, the autopsy results contradicted Ben's story, revealing blunt force injuries to her face, and asphyxia as the cause of death, which suggested Ben was not telling the truth in an attempt to shift some of the blame. Jaden's father passed away due to heart problems before the trial commenced. On June 23, 2014, Ben Blakely appeared in court, displaying no remorse for his actions. His provocative behavior and insults towards others made it clear that he was unbothered by the fact that he had taken the life of Jaden and her unborn child. During the 4-week trial, it emerged that Blakely, of Reading Berks, was a violent and controlling boyfriend. 3 of his former girlfriends testified against him, revealing that he was controlling and violent towards them during their relationships. They alleged that he would confiscate their phones, physically assault them, and even grab them by the throat if they dared to answer back, or if he suspected them of cheating on him. The short-tempered, ginger-haired murderer's outbursts were evident throughout the trial. The judge repeatedly warned him for using foul language in the dock and while on the witness stand, where he continuously shouted at prosecutor Richard Leam and used profanities. His fits of rage were too overwhelming for Jaden's mother and other relatives, who were forced to leave the courtroom in tears on several occasions. Judge Patrick Eccles even had to remove Ben from the courtroom one day, sending him to the cells, and continued the trial in his absence. Although Jake Blakely is under 18, Judge Eccles decided to allow his name to be reported in the media because he believed it was important for the public to know. Jake has admitted to perverting the course of justice, but claims he thought he was burying either weapons or dead animals at the time. His sibling Ben had promised to give him an Xbox game console and £100 if he carried out the malicious act. The jury viewed CCTV footage that showed Ben and Jaden entering an Oxford train station and boarding a train to Didcot. The footage also revealed Blakely returning alone, looking down in an apparent attempt to conceal his face. According to the prosecutor, the crime was premeditated. The argument is that Blakely deliberately lured Jaden to a secluded location, an abandoned barn in another town, where he could take her life without being seen. What other plausible reason could there be for him to take Jaden to such a location after discovering she was pregnant? Jaden was eager to start anew, but Blakely had grown accustomed to controlling every facet of her life and would not relinquish his grip. Moreover, he was unwilling to become a father. The jury deliberated for 20 hours before reaching a verdict, with 11 out of 12 members agreeing. Ben Blakely was found guilty of intentionally taking Jaden Parkinson's life. According to the judge, Jaden finally found the courage to end the relationship in November last year, but Ben Blakely responded by threatening to post intimate photographs online to humiliate her. In an unrelated case, the court had previously sentenced Jake Blakely, Ben's younger brother, to 3 years in prison for perverting the course of justice in July 2014. Ben Blakely, on the other hand, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Matthew Patrick Podolak. Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak was born on June 10, 1975 in Ohio, USA to Patricia Romano and Leonard Podolak. During his high school years, Matthew was a member of the school hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Following his naval service, Matthew secured a job at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. However, he struggled to get along with his colleagues. According to his sister Chrissy Duca, some coworkers disliked him, possibly due to jealousy over his expected promotion and his uncle's plans to groom him to take over the business. Matthew enjoyed pursuing outdoor activities, such as boating, camping, and hunting. In his free time, he also played softball and hockey. Matthew met Holly McFeature in 2003, and they began dating shortly after. They eventually moved in together in a home in Cleveland. Their friends described Matthew as a man overjoyed to have found someone to settle down with and start a family. Within a year, they had their first child, a daughter named Samantha, and about 2 years later, they had a son named Josh. The family also included a third child, from Holly's previous relationship. Matthew's mother, Patricia, described how her son fell deeply in love, giving himself 110% to the relationship. He was truly devoted to Holly. However, by 2005, their romance had deteriorated, becoming argumentative, strained, and divisive. Whenever Matthew and Holly quarreled, he would leave home and spend the night at a friend's place. This wasn't an isolated incident, and his friends repeatedly urged him to break off the relationship, warning him about Holly's selfish behavior. Despite their concerns, Matthew refused to listen and always went back to her. Matthew held a life insurance policy that named Holly McFeature as the beneficiary. Despite friends warning Matthew to remove Holly from the list of beneficiaries, he refused to do so. Russell, Matthew's closest friend, portrayed Matthew's emotional state as fluctuating wildly, veering from extreme happiness to intense anger, upset, tears, and occasional fear. Russell also testified that he was aware Matthew had sunk into depression during that period. According to Russell, Matthew was overly ecstatic about his future life and was particularly enthusiastic about raising all 3 kids. However, given the unstable situation, Russell cautioned Matthew that he needed to take precautions to safeguard himself and remove any firearms from the house. In 2006, after the hockey season came to an end, Matthew turned to online gambling, which led to significant financial losses. His family and friends soon became aware that he was struggling with his mental health, as he was clearly unwell and depressed. At the urging of his loved ones, Matthew sought medical attention from a doctor, who subsequently prescribed him antidepressant medication. By Memorial Day weekend, Russell Harry had become very worried about Matthew's physical health. After enlisting Matthew's help to move a motor from one boat to another, Russell noticed some alarming changes. Matthew, once very strong, had now gained weight and was sweating excessively. He was also complaining of back pain and felt he had lost his strength. Russell urged Matthew to see a doctor and even recommended a specific physician, Dr. Thomas Mandat. Matthew saw Dr. Mandat on July 26, 2006. During this visit, Russell overheard Holly yelling at Matthew in the background, telling him he was too stupid to know which doctor he was supposed to see. At the appointment, Matthew complained about back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed Matthew with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help pass the stones and alleviate the associated pain. On July 30th, Matthew phoned his father to share the news that he had purchased a fishing rod for his daughter and was eager to take her and his father on a fishing trip in the near future. His father reported that Matthew sounded enthusiastic and was looking forward to their outing. Later that same evening, Matthew attended a party hosted by Russell, who would later testify that Matthew's physical appearance was alarming. He had put on even more weight, was sweating excessively, and struggled to walk without support. Additionally, Matthew complained of severe back pain. Later that evening, Holly reached out to Matthew's father to inform him that she had called 911 because Matthew was in distress. The father had a brief conversation with his son over the phone and found him to be confused and extremely upset. Following the ambulance's arrival, Matthew was rushed to Parma General Hospital due to suspected organ failure. It was eventually discovered that Matthew's kidneys had failed, and the doctors diagnosed him with metabolic acidosis, a condition where his blood had become excessively acidic. Dr. Mandad, a member of the emergency medical team, suspected that Matthew might have ingested a toxic substance, such as methanol or antifreeze. He and the team questioned Holly, who was present, about the possibility of Matthew having swallowed antifreeze or medical alcohol. However, she denied that Matthew had taken anything. On July 31, 2006, Matthew Podek passed away in the hospital due to kidney failure. According to Dr. Mandad's testimony, metabolic acidosis is typically caused by respiratory problems. However, that was not the cause in this case. Dr. Mandad clarified that ethylene glycol is another possible cause of metabolic acidosis, which is what happened here. Matthew's death was devastating to his family and friends, but Holly seemed unaffected. Rebecca Vega, Holly's friend, testified that she had reached out to Holly to offer support in the days that followed Matthew's death. Vega accompanied Holly to the funeral home to help make arrangements and was struck by Holly's complete lack of emotional response, neither sadness nor shock. Matthew's father stated that during the wake, he had to request Holly McFeature to enter the room where the casket was located so that she could receive visitors. However, she appeared to be emotionally numb, as if she felt nothing. Similarly, Russell Harry described Holly's behavior as if she was attending a celebration, completely unaffected by the recent events. A remarkable detail surfaced shortly after. The day following Matthew's death, August 1st, Holly used an ATM to withdraw cash using Matthew's bank card. Furthermore, she wrote checks in his name, effectively draining his bank account. Holly was subsequently arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery after Matthew's mother notified the authorities about the suspicious activity. In the end, Holly agreed to pay restitution and received a 1-year probation sentence. Her family claimed she had only been trying to obtain money to support the couple's children in Matthew's absence. Holly McFay was listed as a beneficiary on Matthew's life insurance policy, but the payout was relatively small, totaling just $10,000, which she received 2 weeks after his death. During a visit to Holly's home, her friend Rebecca Vega noticed cleaning solvents left out in the open in the kitchen, which she found concerning given the presence of young children. When Vega inquired about the substances, Holly explained that one of the items was antifreeze, which Matthew had used to winterize his boat. Matthew's best friend, Russell, testified that Matthew hadn't owned a working boat since 2004 or 2005, when the engine failed. Michael Jama, a Cleveland police officer who had known Holly McPhee since 2002, would often visit her house for coffee and conversation. He'd typically call ahead to avoid interrupting another man's visit. One day, he called to check if he was catching her at a bad time, and she told him not to worry about it anymore, explaining that Matthew had passed away the previous week. The officer was struck by her casual tone, which seemed careless and heartless to him. After Matthew's death, Holly had his computer handed over to a friend who then removed certain content from the hard drive. She also cut up his clothes to make a quilt, which meant that his father and brother were left with no clothing items to remember him by. 6 weeks later, Holly started dating Charles Lightbaum, a police officer from Cleveland. At first, she told him that her ex-boyfriend had died from kidney failure. However, she later changed her story after the autopsy results were released in January 2007, revealing that Matthew Podak's system contained a large amount of ethylene glycol, the active ingredient found in antifreeze. Holly confided in her new lover, Charles Lightbaum, that Matthew might have intentionally taken something to end his life. The autopsy report revealed that Matthew Podak's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine whether it was an accident, suicide, or homicide. Holly also told Sean Walsh that Matthew had died in an industrial accident, suggesting that a colleague might have poisoned him out of jealousy due to his privileged position as the boss's nephew. However, Matthew's family suspected that the person responsible might have been someone within their inner circle. In 2007, after Holly moved away, detectives visited her former house and seized 2 bottles of antifreeze from the garage, as documented in the police report. Later that year, following her breakup with Charles Lightbaum, Holly met Jameson Kennedy at the bar where she worked. This was in the spring of 2008. Notably, Holly did not share any information about Matthew's death with Jameson. It is worth mentioning that Jameson Kennedy had a substantial criminal record and struggled with alcohol and drug abuse. One day in September 2008, Holly and Jameson were together, drinking and intimate, when Holly became emotional and started discussing Matthew. She broke down in tears, saying she wanted to escape the situation and leave Cleveland behind. She expressed regret over what had happened. Jameson asked her what she was sorry about, and Holly confided that she had tampered with Matthew's drinks, causing him to fall ill over time and eventually leading to his death. Jameson was unsure if she was telling the truth. Following Holly's confession, Jameson met with an old friend, Santiago Feliciano, a lawyer. Jameson shared Holly's admission with Santiago, who advised him to report the information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. After Jameson discussed Holly's confession with her, he called her to clarify the details. But during their phone conversation, Holly vehemently denied ever harming Matthew, accusing Jameson of misquoting her. She insisted she never told him about putting anything in his drink and would never do such a thing. The incident marked the beginning of the end of their relationship. Jameson accused Holly of cheating on him on November 8, 2008, and confronted her at her house to discuss his suspicions. Feeling scared, Holly called the police. When the officers arrived, Jameson attacked them, leading to his arrest and charge of assault. Jameson Kennedy was later found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison for assaulting the officers. Not only that, but after his arrest, he also informed the police about Holly's alleged confession. He refused to protect the person responsible for his own arrest. As a result, more and more evidence pointed to Holly McPhee's involvement in Matthew Podolak's death. The police initially investigated Matthew's death in 2007, following the release of the autopsy report. However, they did not initially suspect foul play, which led to a lengthy delay in the case. Let's examine the autopsy report in more detail. As a seasoned forensic pathologist and medical examiner with over 10 years of experience, Dr. Galita's job involved performing autopsies and determining the causes and nature of death. With more than 3,500 autopsies under his belt, he was well equipped to conduct the autopsy on Podolak, which he did the day after Podolak's death. 6 months after the incident, in January 2007, the autopsy report detailing the findings was released. The report, which was signed by the doctor and the county coroner, Dr. Elizabeth Balge, concluded that Tupac's death was caused by chronic intoxication due to ethylene glycol, although the manner in which this occurred remained undetermined. Dr. Galita explains that the ethylene glycol Matthew Podolak ingested entered his bloodstream and was quickly metabolized by alcohol dehydrogenase in his liver. This enzyme facilitates certain chemical reactions in the body. The resulting metabolite was converted into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form calcium oxalate crystals. A large quantity of these crystals accumulated in Matthew's kidneys, hindering their proper function. Dr. Galita stated that Matthew's flank pain, which began in May 2006, was caused by crystals in his kidneys. An examination of Matthew's kidneys revealed not only damage, but also signs of the kidneys attempting to heal. Additionally, Dr. Galita discovered crystals in Matthew's heart and brain and diagnosed him with severe acute myocarditis, an acute inflammation of the heart muscle. According to Dr. Galita, Matthew's myocarditis could not have developed from a single instance of ethylene glycol ingestion, but rather required at least 3 weeks to develop. Furthermore, Dr. Galita ruled out the possibility that Matthew had suffered a heart attack. Dr. Galita reached the conclusion that Matthew's death was caused by long-term poisoning from ethylene glycol. She believed that this poisoning happened due to a series of acute but non-fatal intoxications that occurred over a period of at least 3 months. Matthew's friends stated that his go-to drink was raspberry iced tea, which he would often bring to work in a thermos or in its original packaging, whether it was a half-gallon or whole-gallon container. According to his friend Michael Mahal, Holly McPheecher would occasionally bring Matthew lunch at work, and it would always come with a half-gallon or whole-gallon container of iced tea. In August 2007, the police collected 2 bottles of antifreeze, one from Peak and one from Saturn, from the garage of McPheecher's former home. This was 3 years after she had moved out, and also after the autopsy results had been released in 2010. The coroner's report was later amended, and Dr. Frank Miller, the then county coroner, signed off on the updated document. Although the cause of death remained the same, the amended report changed the manner of death from undetermined to homicide, concluding that Podolak's death was a result of chronic ethylene glycol intoxication and was indeed a homicide. 6 years after Matthew Podolak's death, the authorities finally decided to arrest Holly McFeature in connection with his passing. In July 2012, they charged her with 2 counts: aggravated deprivation of Matthew's life and contaminating a substance for human consumption or use. Matthew's older brother, Mark Podolak, revealed that his family had long suspected McFeature's involvement in his brother's death, citing her unusual behavior. She didn't seem like someone who was grieving or about to lose a loved one. The investigators believed that Holly had been secretly adding antifreeze to Matthew's cold raspberry tea over a period of weeks or even months. She pleaded not guilty to the charges and appeared in court in 2013. The case against Holly rested solely on circumstantial evidence. During the trial, the prosecution called 15 witnesses, including Matthew's family and friends, Dr. Galita, Dr. Thomas Mandat, Matthew's doctor, and several police officers involved in the investigation. These witnesses testified about Holly's behavior, a phone call Matthew made before visiting the doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a working boat since 2004, so he had no reason to use antifreeze for that purpose. Holly's lawyers claimed that Matthew's family and friends were convinced of her guilt and immediately launched a vigorous campaign targeting law enforcement agencies to ensure she was brought to justice after his death. The state's primary witness was Dr. Galita, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Matthew's body. During his extensive testimony, Dr. Galita explained how he arrived at the conclusion that Matthew had been subjected to chronic poisoning over a period of 3 months. He pointed out that he discovered crystals in Matthew's kidneys and cardiac myocarditis, both of which can be caused by exposure to ethylene glycol. He ruled out other possible causes of myocarditis, including bacterial, fungal, and viral infections. Furthermore, Dr. Galita testified that if Matthew had experienced a single acute exposure to ethylene glycol, myocarditis would not have developed. Galita clarified why he altered the original autopsy report 3 years later. At the time in 2007, the coroner's office lacked sufficient information to conclude that the death was a result of intentional life deprivation, so the manner of death was initially classified as undetermined. The testimonies of other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings on the cause of death. Matthew's friends testified that Podolak's health started to decline in the spring of 2006, and he was diagnosed with kidney stones in July of that year, with his health continuing to deteriorate afterwards. As for the relationship between Podolak and McFeature, the state's witnesses stated that it had become increasingly volatile. Matthew seemed fearful, and one of his friends even advised him to take his weapons out of the house, which he did. Holly's lawyers claimed their client was not responsible for Matthew's death. They suggested that Matthew, who was struggling with depression due to online gambling losses, work issues, and communication problems with his young child, intentionally took a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense also argued that Matthew died from a single dose rather than multiple doses taken over several weeks or months. To support this, they presented Dr. Robert Bucks, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. He testified that Matthew suffered from acute poisoning, which indicated a one-time ingestion of ethylene glycol and suggested that Matthew wanted to end his life. Dr. Bucks disagreed with Dr. Galita's finding of myocarditis, instead believing Matthew had a heart attack. He also stated that a person can have myocarditis without ethylene glycol poisoning, and that flank pain is not a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. Additionally, Dr. Bucks claimed there was no connection between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning. The state presented evidence that despite struggling with depression, Matthew was dedicated to being a good father to his children and had made plans with them as recently as the day before his death. Additionally, there was evidence that he had sought medical help for both his mental and physical health issues. One key witness at the trial was Jamison Kennedy, who both asserted that Holly had confessed to them that she had mixed something into Matthew's drinks. Kennedy was brought to the courtroom from prison, where he was serving a 10-year sentence for assaulting police officers. He repeated his claim that Holly had confessed to him about her involvement in Matthew's death, but Holly denied making such a statement. Despite Kennedy's questionable credibility, the court transcript shows that Sergeant Michael Quinn testified that when Kennedy initially told the authorities about Holly's confession, there was no public knowledge that Matthew had died from ethylene glycol poisoning. This suggests that Kennedy's information did not come from elsewhere, contradicting Holly's claim. Holly claimed that Kennedy had given her a choice: either receive leniency in her criminal case or exact revenge on her. After deliberating for 3 days, the jury delivered a verdict on August 28, 2013, finding Holly guilty on all counts. The court subsequently sentenced her to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This case relied solely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimonies. In your opinion, was Holly truly guilty? Is it plausible that Matthew intentionally consumed antifreeze for 3 months in an attempt to harm himself? Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was an avid motorcyclist and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI considers a criminal organization, the second largest in the world after the Hells Angels. His parents divorced when he was around 10 years old. However, they maintained a good relationship and were equally involved in their son's upbringing. His father's love of motorcycles gradually passed on to Brandon. At the age of 25, he had his own motorcycle which he had assembled by hand and treasured dearly. He often spent time with other bikers, but did not belong to any motorcycle club. The unexpected death of Brandon's father in April 2005 was a very challenging experience for him. Trying to overcome the growing depression, Brandon decided to make a change in his life. He got on a motorcycle and drove to Las Vegas. After living in Vegas for about a year, Brandon met 24-year-old Amber Andrews, whose company helped him forget his problems. Their romance happened quickly, and they got married just 2 months after meeting. By this time, Amber was already pregnant. In December 2006, she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of a child was a crucial change in Brandon's life. He became a caring father and husband who worked at a high-paying job and prioritized his family over his personal interests. However, the same could not be said about Amber. Seemingly indifferent to the birth of their child, she remained devoted to her lifestyle, frequently attending biker gatherings and various parties. As a result, their family's relationship began deteriorating rapidly, sometimes leading to conflicts. Inevitably, this situation culminated in a divorce, filed 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of the child, as he was better able to provide for both himself and his son. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown of Meeker in Oklahoma, while Brandon went back to San Diego with his son. He was happy to be reunited with his family, who later assisted him in raising the child. Over time, the emotional scars from the failed marriage began to heal, and Brandon regained his optimism about the future. However, while contemplating the future, the past came knocking at his door. In the summer of 2012, he saw his ex-wife Amber on his doorstep. She wanted to reconcile and asked him to give their relationship another chance. The feelings that Brandon had diligently suppressed resurfaced. He believed in the sincerity of his ex-wife and agreed to a fresh start. In September, their son Brando was supposed to start kindergarten, and Amber asked the three of them to go to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wanted to see their grandson. Brandon agreed, and they started preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their son returned to San Diego, Van Emblem contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Van reported that his friend and employer, 30-year-old Justin Hammer from Garvin County, had asked for help to dispose of a body, claiming it was the body of Brandon Duran. After receiving the call from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation about a possible crime, the local sheriff and his assistant immediately went to the ranch owned by Hammer. Authorities also contacted Brandon's relatives from San Diego, but they found that Brandon was unreachable for several days until they confirmed the information provided by Van. They decided not to disclose the details of this case to Brandon's family. During questioning, Justin Hammer quickly confessed to murdering Brandon Duran. However, Hammer claimed he acted in self-defense, describing Duran as a dangerous motorcycle gang member who had threatened him. Hammer alleged that on August 7th, Brandon had driven up to his house on a motorcycle, kicked open the door, gone inside, and started threatening him. Hammer stated that he had a close personal connection with Amber, which prompted Brandon to pay him an unexpected visit. According to Hammer, Brandon threatened him, ordering him to stay away from Amber, and warning that he would ask his biker friends to harm him severely, even suggesting that his family members would be targeted if he didn't comply. Supposedly, Hammer then picked up a shotgun from the corner of the room and fired it, only to discover that he had killed Brandon. Afraid of retaliation from the Banditos Motorcycle Club, Hammer chose not to contact the police and instead opted to cover up all evidence of the incident. Justin relocated the body to the bathroom, where he dismembered it using a saw and then placed the parts into 5-gallon buckets. He filled the buckets with cement to encase the remains. According to his statement, the buckets were too heavy for him to load into his pickup truck by himself, so he enlisted the help of his friend Van. After disposing of the body, Hammer thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence. He then burned the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags he had used. Additionally, he claimed to have given Brandon's motorcycle to a relative who took it apart for spare parts. The officers went to Meeker to break the devastating news to Amber. After learning about the death of her child's father, the woman was left in shock. Despite being divorced, she and Brandon had planned to reconcile and start living together again. Amber revealed that she had gotten into a fight with Brandon the previous day, triggered by his discovery of her romantic relationship with Justin Hammer. Following their argument, Brandon stormed off on his motorcycle, vowing to confront her lover himself. The investigation revealed new evidence that raised significant doubts about the credibility of Hammer's testimony. Criminologists conducting a search of Hammer's home discovered that the door had been kicked in from the inside, and the shoe print on the door matched the sneakers worn by Hammer, strongly indicating that he was responsible for knocking down the door. Furthermore, they uncovered a list of items necessary for disposing of a body and a gun safe, suggesting that the crime was premeditated rather than spontaneous, and that Hammer had been preparing for it in advance. Apart from the 5 buckets, they additionally extracted a cement-filled doghouse from the pond that held extra fragments which did not fit into the buckets. This key evidence led to Justin Hammer being formally charged with first-degree murder. The forensic medical expert faced a challenging task in analyzing the 25 separate body fragments of Duran. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had been shot 4 times in the head, with 3 pistol shots and 1 shotgun blast. According to the expert, the shotgun gun blast was the final shot, and by then, Brandon was likely deceased and lying on the floor. This contradicted Hammer's statement, which claimed he had fired only once with a shotgun. However, this didn't add up to the investigators. They wondered why Hammer would use a shotgun after firing 3 pistol shots, especially since Brandon was already dead. This evidence hinted that someone other than Hammer might have been involved in the crime. The investigators' call to Brandon's mother, Cindy, left her stunned when they told her about her son's death. Once she recovered from the shock, Cindy explained that Brandon had never been a member of the Banditos Motorcycle Club. She said that Brandon's father had passed on his love for motorcycles to his son, but it never went beyond that. Cindy also mentioned another interesting detail. When Brandon left for Oklahoma, his bike was broken, and he had loaded it into the back of his pickup truck, hoping to fix it there. Cindy also said that Brandon avoided conflict and that his ex-wife, Amber, was the source of all his problems. Amber's infidelity had plagued their relationship from the start. Even after the birth of their son, Amber continued her lifestyle, and whenever Brandon expressed his disapproval of her behavior, she would start a fight. All this eventually led to a divorce, with Brandon getting full custody of their son, which made Amber furious. She then disappeared for over a year, showing no interest in her son's life. So, when she suddenly appeared and asked for a second chance, Brandon and his family were shocked. After learning about Justin Hammer and Amber's romantic relationship, the investigators turned their attention to Brandon's ex-wife. Amber told the police that Brandon had left on a motorcycle following their argument. However, his family contradicted this, saying the motorcycle was broken. This raised a question. If the breakage was not severe, why would Brandon take the motorcycle all the way to Oklahoma instead of fixing it at home? Amber had never mentioned that Brandon was repairing it. Amber also claimed she had a doctor's appointment on the day Brandon went to deal with Hammer, but the police found no evidence of her visit to any medical facility in the city. This meant Amber had no solid alibi for the time in question. Further investigation revealed that Amber had asked a friend to babysit her son on the day of Brandon's death. When the friend arrived at 3 p.m., Amber and Brandon left the house together in Brandon's pickup truck with a motorcycle in the back. Amber had left her phone at home and didn't return for 8 hours. When she finally did, Brandon and his motorcycle were no longer in the truck. After accessing Amber's phone, investigators discovered a message she had received shortly before she and Brandon left the house. The text, sent by Justin Hammer, read, "The ink is ready." Investigators suspected that this was a coded message, indicating that everything was in place to deal with Brandon. Following interviews with Amber's close friends, detectives learned that she had no intention of reconciling with her ex-husband and consistently spoke ill of him. She harbored a strong resentment towards Brandon, who had been granted full custody of their son, and viewed him as uncool, referring to him as a square. Soon, the authorities discovered physical evidence that contradicted Amber's story. Handwriting analysis revealed that Amber had written the note found in Hammer's safe, which detailed the items needed to dispose of a body. Upon reviewing the local hardware store's CCTV footage, police found evidence that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. The footage showed Hammer buying buckets and other items from a list Amber had written the day before Brandon's murder. However, while awaiting trial, Hammer insisted that he did not have an accomplice and acted in self-defense. He claimed that the items on Amber's list were needed to repair the house, not to dispose of a body. Furthermore, Hammer explained that he used two types of weapons, stating that he held a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other. This statement was considered unusual by the investigators. The jury has recommended a life sentence without parole for Hammer, deliberating for only about an hour and a half, despite expectations of a trial that would last several weeks. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the verdict, deeming it appropriate and a means of providing justice for Brandon Duran's family. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, was also pleased with the jury's decision, acknowledging that it was a difficult choice, but one she had been hoping for over the past 2 years. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of her ex-husband, desecrating his remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber pleaded not guilty, hoping to be released on bail. However, the district judge denied the request, stating that the nature of the allegations warranted the denial of bond. In the spring of 2017, the trial got underway. Prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin made the case that Amber was the mastermind behind the crime. They alleged that she had lured Brandon to her lover's house, where Hammer shot him 3 times with a pistol. Amber then fired the final shot from a shotgun, according to the prosecutors. Throughout the trial, the prosecutors emphasized that all witness statements and evidence pointed to Amber's direct involvement in the crime. They argued that she was the only person with a motive to want Brandon out of the way. The defense attorney, Jay Mendros, argued that the prosecutor's office failed to provide any evidence linking Amber to the case, dismissing the allegations as a conspiracy theory. According to Mendros, Amber was not a cold-blooded killer, and Justin Hammer committed the murder because he was afraid of losing her to Brandon Duran. Mendros described the situation as a perfect recipe for disaster, with Duran returning to Oklahoma to rekindle his relationship with Amber Andrews, while Hammer, who had dated Andrews for a year, felt threatened by Duran's presence. Mendros emphasized that Justin Hammer had a clear motive to kill Duran, citing the love triangle between Hammer, Andrews, and Duran. He stressed that the situation was complex, with Andrews having relationships with both men and frequently going back and forth between them. The prosecution, Mendros claimed, had twisted and distorted the evidence to make it appear sinister. He alleged that the prosecution was attempting to convict Amber based on suspicion and innuendo, rather than concrete evidence. Mendros pointed out that Justin Hammer had confessed to the murder, stating that he acted alone. This, Mendros argued, was the only concrete evidence in the case, and it did not implicate Amber as a conspirator or murderer. Jurors delivered a guilty verdict after more than 4 hours of closing arguments in a Garvin County District courtroom, recommending 35-year-old Amber Andrews be sentenced to life in prison. Sentencing was set for June 12, 2017. At the hearing, Amber appeared in a good mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, emotionally took the witness stand to express the impact of her son's death on her and her grandson. Before the judge's verdict, defense attorney Jay Mendros made another statement, saying, "It's still the defense's position that there's nothing that ties her to this murder." Mendros told the judge there's no evidence that she was involved in this murder. He would ask the judge to disregard the jury's verdict and reset the case, arguing that the state's case was void of evidence and played on jurors' emotions to get the guilty verdict. Amber Andrews was given a life sentence without parole for the murder of Brandon Duran in the first degree. She also received 7 years for desecrating his remains and another 10 years for conspiring to commit a felony. Her accomplice, Justin Hammer, is currently serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, while Andrews is incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. As for Brandon's son, Brando, he has been in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services since August 7, 2012, and has been living with a foster family. After a long battle with the court system, Cindy, Brando's grandmother, was finally able to bring him back to San Diego in January 2013 to live with her. However, it took her 5 more years to gain full custody of Brando. After the trial, Cindy and her relatives told Brando the truth about the verdict and his mother, Amber Andrews. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965 in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, to Cyrus and Malene Spencer. As a young boy, his passion for active games and sports helped him develop a strong physique and spirit. In high school, his exceptional skills earned him recognition as a standout member of the wrestling team. With a curious mind and a dream to carry on the family legacy, Frank enrolled in a local university after graduating from high school in 1984. He completed his studies in 1988 and, following his father's passing, took over the family business, becoming the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts and Used Cars. A pivotal moment in the young man's life took place in 1997, when fate introduced him to Maria. They instantly felt a strong connection. Maria was known for her fiery personality, bold nature, and intense emotions, which captivated those around her. According to Frank's friend Paul Siciliano, Frank had always been drawn to free-spirited individuals, and Maria was no exception. When the couple met, they had an instant spark and enjoyed each other's company. However, not everyone was thrilled about their relationship, particularly their parents. It was rumored that Maria's father, Anthony Rocco Franklin, had ties to a gang and was even known as a hired hitman. He took an immediate disliking to Frank and tried to prevent their union for some time. The Spencer family also disapproved of Frank's choice of partner, so the couple decided to elope and rent an apartment away from their families. This allowed them to maintain contact with their friends while keeping their families at a distance. As time passed, their families had no choice but to accept their relationship. Maria and Frank eventually got married and started a family, first having a boy and then a girl. The family later moved into a new home. Frank was a hard worker, owning an auto parts business and sponsoring racing cars. His top priority and motivation in life became providing everything necessary for his family, especially his children. Maria initially took on the responsibilities of managing the household and caring for the children. However, she eventually shifted her focus to coaching her daughter's soccer team, despite having a law degree. Friends observed that, unlike her husband, Maria seemed less invested in their marriage. She appeared distracted and somewhat detached from reality. Her lack of enthusiasm for domestic duties and responsibilities was evident. What truly concerned her, however, was the family's finances. While she freely spent the money Frank earned, her indifference towards the children was even more notable. Maria's behavior in her marriage became increasingly problematic over time. Her selfish and eccentric ways led to her husband's growing discontent. He believed that as a mother, she should have become more mature and considerate of others, but Maria showed no signs of changing. By 2006, her husband had had enough and filed for divorce, exhausted by her constant scandals and inappropriate behavior. He was also worried about the negative impact her behavior was having on their children's well-being, and eventually, divorce seemed like the only way out. After deciding to separate, the relationship between the former spouses became increasingly strained. A confrontation ensued. Spencer was adamant that he should have full custody of the children, as he distrusted his ex-wife and believed she was incapable of providing proper care. However, not everyone in Spencer's circle agreed with his stance. For instance, his friend Ron argued that for the sake of the children's normal development, both parents needed to be involved. He strongly advised Spencer to negotiate with Maria and share custody equally. Despite this, Spencer was convinced he knew what was best and continued to demand sole custody. In response, Maria also demanded sole custody and was counting on receiving substantial child support payments. The conflict escalated over time. Due to his ex-wife Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police on multiple occasions. Maria would not only attack him, but also their children. Not everyone believed Frank's claims, however. That was until an incident in 2008 that validated his story. Maria got into a physical fight with her former mother-in-law near their child's school. The situation unfolded when Maria showed up to pick up their daughter, despite Frank's mother trying to intervene. It turned out that Frank's mother was justified in stopping Maria, as they had a prior arrangement that day, but Maria changed her plans at the last minute. Following the altercation, Maria took their child and drove away without buckling her up. The police pulled her over and deemed her actions a threat to the child's life and health. As a result, Maria faced legal repercussions, including charges of disorderly conduct. Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, alleging that she repeatedly followed him. Maria was subsequently charged with this additional crime. Ultimately, the prosecution failed to prove the threat to the child's life, and Maria agreed to plead guilty to disorderly conduct and stalking in exchange for the dropped charges. Maria ultimately admitted her guilt and was fined $600. Yet this did not deter her from continuing her disruptive behavior. In fact, she became even more bitter and resentful following the incident. Frank's friends and family members began to hear more frequent complaints from him as Maria's threats and stalking intensified. Some of Maria's colleagues even revealed that she had openly expressed her hatred for Frank and threatened to take his life. This prompted one of her coworkers to jokingly refer to her as the Black Widow. Despite Maria's aggressive behavior, Frank attempted to remain calm and composed. He made multiple attempts to reason with his former partner, but she refused to back down. As a precaution, Frank started documenting all their conflicts, not to provoke legal action against Maria, but to protect himself in case something went wrong. His sole desire was to live and work in peace, but Maria's behavior had clearly crossed the line. By 2009, Frank and Maria's divorce had dragged on for years, with the children remaining in Maria's care. Despite his struggles, Frank eventually found solace in a new relationship with Julie Dent. However, it wasn't long before Maria discovered Frank's new romance. Although she claimed not to be bothered by Frank's relationship with Julie, in reality, she was deeply upset that Julie was forming bonds with her children. Frank, on the other hand, believed that Maria's intense jealousy was the root of all their troubles. This realization only fueled Maria's anger, culminating in a threatening voicemail to Julie in February 2009, warning her to stay away from her kids. The situation took a turn for the worse when the main character's father-in-law, Rocco, was released from prison after serving a 5-year sentence for fraud. Having spent time behind bars only seemed to worsen Rocco's notorious reputation, and Frank knew from past experiences that this spelled trouble. Many people believed that Maria had inherited her father's troublesome nature. This development made Frank's circle notice that he had become increasingly pensive and worried, and with good reason. The first incident following Rocco's release was a break-in at Frank's office, where important documents related to the divorce proceedings were stolen. The next day, Maria contacted her ex-husband and hinted that she had found a trash bag containing some interesting items on her porch. Frank understood what she was getting at and advised her to return the stolen goods. He also reported the incident to the police, but unfortunately, they were unable to find any evidence linking anyone to the crime. While the investigation was unable to prove anyone's involvement, it was clear to everyone that Maria and her father had a motive. The ex-wife was also considered a suspect, but in the end, the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Meanwhile, thanks to the authorities' efforts, Maria returned the stolen documents to their rightful owner. It seemed that the documents didn't contain anything substantial that could be used in court anyway. The failure to gather evidence was seen by Frank's adversaries as a green light to act with impunity. The situation grew more intense. Afterwards, the ex-partner began making threats on social media. She remained unhappy that the kids were in touch with Julie. In contrast, the new partner remained calm and composed. She took pleasure in spending time with her partner and his children. She avoided getting involved in the complex relationships between her ex-husband and his former spouses. But she was furious that Maria's desire for revenge had led her to neglect her parental responsibilities. The disputes dragged on until 2010, when Frank finally lost patience. He could no longer tolerate the situation and turned to the authorities for help. He asked the police to evaluate his ex-wife's behavior and provided them with their correspondence, which included implicit threats. However, Maria insisted that this was simply her communication style and that she didn't mean to threaten anyone. Once again, it was impossible to prove her guilt, as her warnings were too vague to be taken as concrete threats. Frank's tormentor got away with it again. In January 2010, disaster struck Frank once more. He and his partner had planned a romantic getaway to the Caribbean, but the night before they were due to leave, a fire broke out at his mother's house. Although no one was injured, the property was completely destroyed by the flames and smoke. Witnesses reported that a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and acquaintances, pulled up outside the house. The woman behind the wheel was seen smiling as she watched the scene before driving off. Tragically, after the fire had been extinguished, a dog belonging to one of Frank's children was found dead in the ashes. Frank was forced to call the police again, but despite their suspicions, no one believed the fire was anything other than an accident. It was clear, however, that Maria would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Yet, with no evidence of deliberate arson surviving the blaze, the fire was ruled an accident. After sending a message to Frank, in which she subtly gloated about how karma had caught up with him, the frenzied woman started sending similar messages to Julie too. As the police failed to take action, Maria became increasingly audacious, eventually feeling bold enough to make public threats against her ex and his new partner. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house, where she was home at the time. Fortunately, she escaped by jumping off the porch roof and was unharmed, although her home was left uninhabitable. In response, Frank invited Julie to move in with him, which the young couple feared would only enrage his ex further, but they had no other choice. At the same time, an investigation into the cause of the fire was underway. The similarity in the method used suggested that it was the same person or people responsible. Although the woman's home was located in a different county, the couple hoped for an unbiased investigation by the police. Unfortunately, the lack of evidence meant they were unable to assist, and the fire could have been dismissed as a freak accident. However, Julie was resolute and appealed to higher authorities, which unexpectedly moved the investigation forward. The search of the suspect's backyard yielded flares, including a damaged one lying in the grass. Another flare, similar to the one that had caused the fire, was also discovered. Furthermore, experts found that the steps on the home's terrace had been soaked with a flammable mixture. After thorough inspections and expert analysis, arson was officially declared as the cause of the fire. Despite this, the lack of direct evidence once again meant that the perpetrators escaped punishment. Summer 2012 was unseasonably cold. In June of that year, Frank and Julie faked a breakup as part of a clever plan to throw Maria off guard. This was followed by the real final demise of the Spencer marriage. But the hoped-for peace didn't materialize. Just weeks later, on July 3rd, Frank was tragically found dead. Joe, a close friend, decided to visit him because he hadn't heard from Frank in a while, which didn't come as a shock to anyone. Frank had recently gone through a divorce and was seeking solitude. However, there was an urgent matter to attend to. For years, the friends had been teammates in a recreational karting league with their kids, and they were in the middle of a crucial series that they were determined to win. But unexpected setbacks could jeopardize their chances of success. Since Frank wasn't responding to phone calls, Joe decided to visit him in person. When Joe arrived at the cottage, he grew anxious. The front door was slightly open, and there were suspicious stains near the threshold. His worst fears were confirmed as soon as he stepped inside the house. He found his friend Frank lying lifeless on the floor. Despite the gruesome scene, Frank's face looked peaceful, as if he had finally found the tranquility he had been searching for. As Joe walked around the body, he noticed dried blood in Frank's ear. Without delay, Joe called emergency services as an accidental witness to the scene. When news of the shocking incident spread throughout the district, the culprit behind the horrific crime was instantly suspected. However, it was up to the detectives to gather concrete evidence and piece together the puzzle on their own. Upon arriving at the scene, forensic experts discovered a gruesome sight, with large pools of blood and several long drag marks. Furthermore, they found a clear shoe print on the floor and blood-stained gloves in the kitchen. These crucial pieces of physical evidence were sent to the lab for further analysis. A further investigation revealed that the bloody shoe print found at the scene matched the size of the shoes worn by Rocco, who is Maria's father. Additionally, skin cells from Frank's ex-wife were discovered inside the gloves that were examined. Notably, the ex-wife had not lived with the deceased for over a year, which means it was highly unlikely that the gloves containing her fresh DNA were left at the house by accident. Overall, all the evidence gathered suggested that both Rocco and Frank's ex-wife were involved in the crime. Soon, the suspects were detained. Autopsy and ballistics analysis determined that Frank Spencer had been shot with two different types of weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper's nest approximately 115 feet from the house. The bullet passed through his hand and penetrated his chest, striking a vital artery. The shot was fatal. However, the attackers did not stop there. They dragged the poor man inside, where a final taunting shot was fired into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. By that time, the man was already deceased. Therefore, the final shot was seen as an act of revenge. It was clear that the shooter harbored hatred toward his victim. Consequently, police speculated that Rocco fired from the rifle, while Maria finished what was started. Additionally, it was discovered that alongside the crime, Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, exposing Rocco and Maria. By reviewing traffic cameras, Spencer's car was spotted on a federal highway moving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. Unfortunately, it was not possible to identify the driver. Eventually, the vehicle was found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's home and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were discovered inside the car. Regarding the victim's dog, it was found 2 days after the incident, having wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Attendees immediately realized that the well-groomed animal had an owner thanks to a microchip. The dog was returned to Spencer's mother. It turned out that Frank had gotten a new pet for his children after the fire. This fortunate discovery helped clarify some aspects and effectively exposed the crime. According to the investigation, the criminals took the dog when they fled the scene. On their way home, Rocco stopped, and during this time, attracted by nearby food smells, the dog managed to escape. Subsequently, it ended up at a house where a wedding ceremony was taking place. This allowed detectives to prove that Rocco's phone pinged near the celebration site on the day of the crime, while his residence in Harrisburg was 12 miles away, contradicting his assertion that he was at home. Likely, it was Maria's idea to take the dog to the children, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Rue admitted that his son-in-law had repeatedly asked him for help and had visited him the day before his death, which explains the traces found at the crime scene. However, Rocco could not explain the presence of a blood pool, and his statement sounded insincere. No one could confirm whether the men got along well or otherwise. Rocco also confessed that Frank had given him the vehicle to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints in the victim's home. By doing so, he essentially admitted to being at the crime scene the day before. Searches were organized at the homes of Rocco and his daughter to find the crime weapons, but the seasoned criminal knew how to dispose of firearms, so neither the rifle nor the revolver was found. Ultimately, it would not have been difficult for him to dispose of the crime weapon. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She insisted that the glove ended up in her ex's house by accident, possibly moved by the children on one of the days. In the end, the suspects were released home. However, detectives did not close the case and continued to gather necessary evidence. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed managed to talk to the former friend during a school football match. During their conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before his death was her face. Her statement sounded odd. The investigation received heightened attention from the state's attorney general, who was extremely upset with the authorities' indifference to Frank's reports and statements. Moreover, the police received numerous complaints about their incompetence. An internal investigation was unavoidable. Unfortunately, it was not possible to prove the officers' negligent attitude towards their duty. According to the police, much information provided by Spencer lacked solid evidence, and the only person who could confirm or refute the officer's words was deceased. The public and the victims' relatives were extremely outraged that their petitions yielded no results. Meanwhile, Investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt, not only in the crime, but also in stalking and other offenses committed earlier. In 2013, a major interrogation was organized. At the same time, Maria and Rocco continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to accusations of providing false testimony. Prosecutors believed that the suspects arrived at Spencer's house together and chose not to use their own transport to avoid drawing attention. Thus, they fled the scene in the victim's car. In late 2014, Maria was arrested again. By this time, Rocco had managed to flee after the last interrogation. He boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. The investigation interpreted the man's behavior as flight and proof of guilt. For 11 months, the criminal was elusive. Eventually, he was apprehended in Buenos Aires, Argentina, after being arrested by local police and fighting extradition to the U.S. However, the criminal's efforts were in vain, and he was sent back to his home country. Justice prevailed in the fall of 2015. Maria's trial took place, and she continued to deny her guilt, shifting the blame to her father. The accused claimed she loved Frank and never wished for his demise. However, numerous witnesses exposed her true character, recounting long-term threats, stalking, and arson. The trial lasted just over a week, and in the end, the jury delivered their verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including deprivation of life, arson, burglary, providing false statements, conspiracy, and making threats. Maria was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years. Eyewitnesses claim that Maria smiled constantly during the trial. "I didn't end his life, so I tried to stay optimistic," she explained in a later interview. A few years later, trials began for Rocco. He was extremely displeased with his daughter's accusations. The defendant insisted he was merely helping her, but was against violence. It was Maria who insisted on the crime. However, physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony Franklin was found guilty of deprivation of life, as well as robbery and arson. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 years. Upon sentencing, the 77-year-old man blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing the judge. Years later, Rocco sought a retrial, claiming his defense attorney had been ineffective, which led to his conviction. Maria also attempted to appeal her case. However, both father and daughter's efforts were fruitless. Every divorce has negative consequences, but for some people, it leads to severe financial problems and emotional distress, resulting in changes to their social status and lifestyle. However, with time, things usually stabilize. Frank Spencer's situation was an exception, as his breakup ultimately proved fatal. It's worth noting that the relationship he was in was extremely toxic. By staying with his partner, Frank was in effect nurturing a dangerous enemy and putting his own life at risk.